Hi everyone, I am Dream Into Wealth. I know people watching this are trying to fall asleep. How are you? And I hope you are okay in life. Listen to my story and make yourself comfortable. Also, if y'all like this kind of stories, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The long trail to quiet wealth. There was an old fella named Virgil Kane who used to sit by the back porch of a lonesome general store somewhere between nowhere and yesterday. Folks passed him often, thinking he was just another desert fossil with stories too dusty to matter. But when the wind turned slow and the stars began to hum, Virgil would speak low, calm, and patient, the way a river talks when no one's watching. His words weren't about gunfights or buried treasure. They were about something far rarer, the long, quiet road to honest wealth. Virgil hadn't been born rich. He'd started his life the way most men do, hungry for something he couldn't quite name. In his youth, he worked cattle till his hands cracked open that old bark, then swung a hammer on the railroads, then tried prospecting when gold fever swept through the hills. For a while, he thought the answer to life was buried under dirt or glittering in rock. But one day, sitting beside a busted mine shaft, he realized all he'd been doing was chasing dust. Was 39 then, too old to be young and too young to be wise. That night, Virgil met a man named Emmett Holt, a traveler with a soft coat and steady voice, the kind of fella who looked like he carried no more weight than the wind itself. Emmett was a banker from the East, though he didn't act like one. He wasn't interested in flash or gambling fortunes. He believed in patience, the kind that grows roots so deep no drought can touch it. They shared a campfire that night, rain hissing off the flames, and Emmett said something Virgil never forgot, son. Wealth ain't what you catch, but what you build slow enough to stay. Those words hit at thunder. Virgil followed Emmett to a nearby town called Merrill Creek, where the banker showed him how money really moved. Quiet day the tide, steady as sunrise. Emmett didn't talk about gold. He talked about value, about compounding, about letting your effort stack itself like layers of old wood till one day you could lean against it and it wouldn't bend. Virgil started small, saved every dime he pud from fixing wagons and hauling goods. He didn't gamble, didn't drink much, didn't show off. Every coin had a job, every dollar a destination. He'd jot numbers down in a leather journal each night, rain or shine, the way a preacher keeps verses. When folks laughed, said he was too stingy to live, he just smiled and said, I ain't trying to live rich. I'm trying to stay alive free. Years passed and Merrill Creek grew fat with trade. The rail line reached it, and with it came merchants, travelers, dreamers. Virgil saw what most didn't, opportunity and quiet things. He bought a small plot near the edge of town where no one thought business would reach. Built a grain mill there with his savings, slow and careful, brick by brick. Folks mocked him at first, but when drought hit 2 summers later and farmers needed every kernel ground before rot, Virgil Mill was the only one running. He didn't charge high, he charged fair. His customers stayed loyal. By the 5th year, he bought another mill 2 towns over, then another. But he never bragged, never rushed. Every time profit rolled in, he set half aside, not for spending, but for growing. He'd sit by his lamp, look at his ledger, and say, money with seed, don't eat it in one season. There were rough times, sure, floods, fires, bad partners. But Virgil never panicked. He learned early that fear spins faster than greed. When markets swung and men sold their land in desperation, he'd buy steady. Not that he wanted to own everything, but was he trusted what time would do when you didn't rush it. He knew the value of compound quiet. By the time his beard turned silver, Virgil owned more than just mills. He had shares in railroads, farmland in the valley, and a little lending office that helped families rebuild after each storm. He didn't measure his worth in gold or paper. He measured it in peace, in how slow he could breathe, in how much time he had to sit and listen to the rain without worry knocking at his door. One autumn, a young ranch hand came to him, desperate and angry. Said he'd lost everything betting on fast horses and faster talkers. Asked Virgil why he'd done it, how he'd built all that from nothing. Virgil didn't answer right away. He'd poured the boy in coffee, watched the steam twist in the lamplight, and said, I didn't build it to win, son. I built it so I wouldn't have to race. The boy didn't understand then. But years later, when he'd built his own small trade post, he came riding back to thank him. By then, Virgil was gone, passed quietly one spring morning, sitting under his porch with that old ledger still open on his lap. The pages were yellow, numbers faded, but on the last line he'd written in shaky hand, "Wealth ain't noise, it's the hum that comes when a man learns to wait." They buried him on a hill above Marrow Creek, where the wind hummed low through the wheat. Some say on rainy nights you still hear him humming soft, like he calculating the dividends of heaven itself. Ain't no statue, no monument, no plaque, just the whisper of patience, the sound of compounding dreams that never needed applause. Yeah, man, so not I've been all right last. But years later, when he built his own small trade post, he came riding back to thank him. By then, Virgil was gone, passed quietly one spring morning, sitting under his porch with that old ledger still open on his lap. The pages were yellow, numbers faded, but on the last line he'd written in shaky hand, "Wealth ain't noise, it's the hum that comes when a man learns to wait." They buried him on a hill above Marrow Creek, where the wind hummed low through the wheat. Some say on rainy nights you can still hear him humming soft, like he calculating the dividends of heaven itself. Ain't no statue, no monument, no plaque, just the whisper of patience, the sound of compounding dreams that never needed applause. If you sit there long enough under that wide western sky, you'll understand what he meant. Every droplet of rain is a second chance. Every seed of work grows when tended with quiet hands. Every man's fortune begins the same way, not with gold, but with grit. And if you listen real close, past the thunder, past the wind, you might yet hear it, that hum. The one that don't promise quick riches nor fame, but something steadier, something truer. The kind of wealth that lasts longer than the man who earned it. Years rolled on after Virgil Kane passed. In the town of Marrow Creek, change like the seasons do, slow enough but owned the patient Nate. The railroads grew rusted, the saloons emptied, and the mills he once ran turned silent, except for the wind slipping through their broken slats. But the hum of his wisdom didn't fade. It lived on in small ways, in the way a man balanced his accounts, in the way a widow tucked a little extra aside after selling her grain, in the way children whispered his name at a prayer they didn't quite understand. There was one such child, a wiry, dust-faced boy named Jonah Marin. His pa worked the rail line till a busted axle and bad luck took him, and his ma cleaned rooms for travelers too broke to tip. They lived small, but they lived right. Every night after supper, Jonah Ma would light a lamp, pull out a tiny tin box, and drop in a nickel or two. Virgil Kane taught my granddad this, she'd say, "Money June, tomorrow, chance in disguise. Save it, and you get to try again when the sun come up." Jonah didn't understand back then. He thought money was for those who already had it. But the older he got, the more that hum began to find him. He'd hear it when rain hit the roof, when the fields shimmered after storm, when the train whistle echoed through the valley at dusk. It was like the land itself was whispering the same thing Virgil once had, that the real wealth wasn't in the noise, but in the quiet building of what mattered. When he turned 16, Jonah left home to work at a telegraph office in the next town over. The pay was small, but the hours were steady. Every time he got his wages, he'd split them, make his ma caught a third for living, a third for learning, and a third for waiting. That last third he saved in an old tobacco tin he kept buried behind the telegraph post. Folks laughed at him, said he was too cautious, too dull, too scared to chase something bigger. But Jonah wasn't scared. He was listening. One night, a storm rolled in fierce and mean. Lightning cut across the plains, and the telegraph line sparked at veins of fire. Jonah stayed late to keep the system running, tipping out messages between towns, trying to warn of the flood. The river swelled that night, took half the town crops and a good portion of the road. Come dawn, Jonah was the only operator still connected west of the ridge. Word spread quick, and by the end of the week, the rail company offered him a bonus for keeping communication alive. He didn't spend a dime of it.
Well, they could have let him put him in a few little tin and bought himself a patch of land near the dry creek bed cheap cause no one wanted it. He worked that soil himself, digging, planting, and listening to the hum that came from the earth each dawn. Most years the crops barely broke even, but he didn't quit. He learned irrigation, learned patience. When a spring finally rose beneath that old dry creek, his patch became the only green for miles. Farmers came to him for water, and he didn't gallop. He lent fair. Not for power, for peace. He remembered what his ma had said, helping others stay steady keeps you steady too. When the harvest came, they paid him back in seed or in time, and he reinvested every bit in the new soil, new wells, new hands. By 30, he'd built himself a co-op of 10 families who all worked the land together, slow, honest, and free. The county banker came riding out one day, tip of his hat all shiny and slick, asking how a dirt farmer had managed such a steady enterprise.
Jonah smiled and said, "By listening to an old hum most men can't hear no more." The banker laughed like it was a joke. But years later, when markets crashed and men lost fortunes overnight, Jonah Farm still stood, not because he was clever, but because he was patient. He never married, never had children of his own, but the people who worked beside him called him Uncle Jonah. He taught him about compounding not money, but kindness, trust, and time. Every favor a coin, he'd say. Spend it careless and you go broke in spirit. Save it in good company and you'll never hunger. When age finally caught up, Jonah sat out on his porch the way Virgil once did, ledger in hand, watching the wheat dance in the sunset. The younger folks would gather round, asking how to get rich like him. He'd chuckle soft, thumb the edge of his weathered notebook, and reply, "Boys, I ain't rich. I'm just done needin'."
And when he passed, they buried him near the old telegraph post where he'd first started listening. His tin box was found under the porch, still filled with coins, untouched. On the inside of the lid, scratched with a nail, was a simple line, "I planted patience and it grew." Well, they built a new community center on his land years later, but they left that porch untouched. Folks say on nights when thunder rolls soft over the plains, the rafters hum low, not mournful, not proud, but content. The sound of wealth that don't fade with age, the kind you can't steal, can't tax.
His co-op of 10 families had grown into near 50. The patch of green he carved from dry land turned into a township that never really had a mayor because it never needed one. Every man, woman, and child tended their share, and when times turned lean, they leaned on each other instead of the bank. They called the place Marin Hollow, though no one quite remembered who started the name, just that it fit like an old glove. The people there lived quiet, same Jonah did. They taught their children to plant slow, work honest, and save steady. When the railroad passed them by, they didn't chase it. When the oil boom hit 3 counties over, they didn't sell their land. They kept humming along, building their lives the way Jonah had taught, not by grabbing what glittered, but by pending what lasted. Then came a young woman named Clara Wynn, fresh out of the city with dust still clinging to her fancy shoes. She'd grown up hearing stories of her great-grandma, who'd once been part of Jonah's first co-op. But Clara didn't come looking for nostalgia. She came looking for something she didn't know she was missing. She'd made her living trading stocks, flipping houses, riding every fast money wave that came her way. She had plenty of cash, but no peace to show for it. Her nights were filled with charts and numbers and a hollowness that even victory couldn't quiet. When a bad market crash wiped half her fortune clean, she packed a small bag and followed the trail her family once walked. Marin Hollow was still there, smaller than she'd imagined, but alive. Kids ran barefoot through the wheat fields, elders played checkers under the shade of a sycamore, and every porch seemed to have a hum beneath its boards, the kind of place where time didn't hurry. Clara rented a small room above the old gin store, the same one Virgil Kane once sat beside generations of. The owner, an old-timer named Della, recognized her last name right away. "You're a Wynn? Well, I'll be. Your kin helped plant the first almond trees yonder." Clara smiled awkwardly, not sure how to respond. Della poured her Zen black coffee and said, "You city folks always forget that the best interest rate the one you earn from patience." For weeks, Clara stayed quiet, watching the rhythm of the town. At first it felt alien. No clocks ticking fast, no folks chasing numbers, but slowly she began to see the wisdom in it. Every dollar that laid hands here had a name and a purpose. They bartered in goods, shared tools, and when the harvest came, they held a feast instead of a sale. It wasn't primitive, it was peaceful. And somewhere in that stillness, Clara began to remember what work was supposed to feel like. She found herself drawn to an old shed by the creek, once used by Jonah himself to tally the co-op ledgers. The place was near abandoned, dust thick as a sermon. But on one beam, carved deep into the wood, were words she could barely make out under the grime. Wealth is the F of patience. She ran her fingers over it and felt that strange hum. Folks always talked about it wasn't loud, more like a breath in the bones. She cleaned up the shed, started spending her mornings there. She wrote down her thoughts, her regrets, her lessons, and without intending to, she began teaching some of the young ones who stopped by. Not about stocks or charts, but about cycles, the way money moves like seasons, how compounding ain't just about interest but trust and reputation too. She told them stories about how cities forgot to rest, how folks worked themselves sick chasing paper that turned to dust when the market sneezing, and the kids listened not 'cause she sounded smart, but 'cause she sounded tired, honest tired. The kind that comes from realizing that the race never had a finish line. As months turned into years, Clara built something new in Marin Hollow, a quiet fund she called it. Everyone chipped in a little, and instead of using it for profit, they used it for patience. When a farmer lost a crop, the fund bought him time. When a widow needed repairs, the fund lent her trust. There were no contracts, no signatures, just handshakes and hums. And somehow it worked. Because faith, once compounded, grows faster than gold in Pruitt. By the time Clara was 50, Marin Hollow had become a small miracle, self-sufficient, debt-free, and content. Outsiders came to study it, scratching their heads at how a town could thrive without loans or greed. Clara never took credit. She always pointed to the old carving by the creek and said, "I just listened to the hum long enough to remember the tune." When she passed, they found her journal full of entries that read more lost parables than lessons. Lines like every storm tests the savings you can't see. Peace is the highest dividend. Slow hands make full harvests. They bound her notes into a single book and left it on the porch of the general store beside an old lantern that never seemed to run out of oil. Travelers would come by and read a few lines and swear they heard a low hum floating through the rafters. Same as before, the hum of Virgil, Jonah, of all those who learned to live not for speed, but for stillness. And now, if you ride through that valley on a rainy night, you might spot Marin Hollow glowing soft through the mist, a place where no one rich, but no one poor either, just folks who figured out that wealth ain't a finish line, it a fire that burns steady when tended right. And sitting under that wide sky with the rain tapping on your hat, you might feel it too, that same hum in your chest, whispering the truth old of the land itself. Don't rush the growing, let time do its work. Time, be it tends to do, kept on drifting, rolling over Marin Hollow like a slow tide. The world outside it grew loud and restless. Cities blinked brighter, trades grew quicker, and the word wealth turned into something heavy and hollow. But out there in that valley where the hum still lived, things moved gentle, like an old wealth that never forgot its steps. One winter, a stranger came riding down the ridge, a young fellow named Eli Dre. He wasn't much more than 20, but he carried the kind of weariness that made him seem older. His clothes were city-tailored but wrinkled from travel. His horse looked like it had more sense than he did, and his eyes had that glazed shine of someone who'd been running from something money couldn't fix. Folks at the general store offered him shelter, food, even a story or two, but Eli barely spoke. He just sat by the fire that first night, listening to the rain hit the roof and the hum drifting from somewhere deep in the boards. After a long silence, he asked, "What is that sound, that low tune I keep hearing?" Della, who was well into her 80s by then, smiled without looking up from her knitting. That time singing to them who ain't trying to outpace it. Eli didn't understand. Not then.
He'd made his name in the city, stock trades, crypto tokens, short sells, and all sorts of quick money with quicker consequences. At 21, he was worth more than most men twice his age. At 22, he'd lost it. Every friend who praised him vanished when the numbers turned red, and every promise of security went up in smoke. He came west not looking for redemption, but for silence, and Marin Hollow gave it to him. The first few weeks, he worked odd jobs, helping mend fences, unload grain, patch roofs. He wasn't good at any of it, but he listened. At every night, he'd wander down by the creek where Clara Wynn old shed stood. He didn't know her story yet, but the words carved into that beam stopped him every time. Wealth is the F of patience. He couldn't make sense of it, but it gnawed at him. One evening, he asked a farmer named Ruth Danner what it meant. She chuckled and said, "Means you can't hear the echo till you stop shouting them." So Eli tried stopping. For the first time in his life, he didn't chase, didn't trade, didn't plan.
Worked the land, planted slow. Watched how the rain came late, how the sun burned quick, how the crops failed, no matter how careful he was. And instead of feeling anger, he felt something close to respect. The land didn't owe him nothing. It just mirrored what he gave it. Time, care, patience.
By spring, he started keeping a journal. Dear Dad, Clara once did. Not about profits, but about patterns. How small habits stacked up like stone. How rest was part of the rhythm, not a reward for ending it. He wrote things like, if I treat my time like soil, I should plant more peace in it. The crop ain't the goal, the growing is. As years passed, Eli became part of Marin Hollow Heartbeat. He taught the younger ones how to save, not in banks, but in actions. He built a new workshop where folks could learn carpentry and trade skills, each student earning a share in the workshop itself. He didn't call it a business, he called it the circle. Every profit that came in got split, one part for wages, one for tools, one for the future. No one owned more than another. And yet, somehow, it grew faster than any company he didn't run in the city. A decade later, people from out started coming to study Marin Hollow again. Economists, writers, even preachers came asking how a town with no banks and no bosses could thrive.
Eli would grin and say, "We don't thrive." With 10 some wrote books about it, calling it the silent economy or the compound of trust. But those who lived there never called it anything to them. It was just life done right. When Eli turned 40, he sat by that same creek Clara once carved her lesson and added his own below it. Patience pays interest forever didn't mean it poetic. He meant it plain, because by then he'd seen what fast money does to the soul, how it burns hot, blinds quick, and leaves folks too empty to rebuild. He'd seen what slow money could do too, how it grew roots that held communities together. His old city friends sometimes wrote him, asking if he missed the thrill of the chase. He'd write back, "I used to run after the wind, now I walk with it." In his later years, he took to sitting on the general store porch, same way Virgil and Jonah before him. Kids would come asking questions not about business, but about living. Mr. Asking a wine. When Eli turned 40, he sat by that same creek Clara once carved her lesson and added his own below it. Patience pays interest forever. He didn't mean it poetic. He meant it plain, because by then he'd seen what fast money does to the soul, how it burns hot, blinds quick, and leaves folks too empty to rebuild. He'd seen what slow money could do too, how it grew roots that held communities together. His old city friends sometimes wrote him, asking if he missed the thrill of the chase. He'd write back, "I used to run after the wind, now I walk with it." In his later years, he took to sitting on the general store porch, same way Virgil and Jonah before him. Kids would come asking questions not about business, but about living. Mr. Yell of Bremen say, "We don't thrive." With 10 some wrote books about it, calling it the silent economy or the compound of trust, but those who lived there never called it anything. To them, it was just life done right. When Eli turned 40, he sat by that same creek Clara once carved her lesson and added his own below it. Patience pays interest forever. He didn't mean it poetic. He meant it plain, because by then he'd seen what fast money does to the soul, how it burns hot, blinds quick, and leaves folks too empty to rebuild. He'd seen what slow money could do too, how it grew roots that held communities together. His old city friends sometimes wrote him, asking if he missed the thrill of the chase. He'd write back, "I used to run after the wind, now I walk with it." In his later years, he took to sitting on the general store porch, same way Virgil and Jonah before him. Kids would come asking questions not about business, but about living. Mr. Yell, Mr. Beauty, and Herbie Doolittle say, "We don't thrive." With 10 some wrote books about it, calling it the silent economy or the compound of trust, but those who lived there never called it anything. To them, it was just life done right. When Eli turned 40, he sat by that same creek Clara once carved her lesson and added his own below it. Patience pays interest forever. He didn't mean it poetic. He meant it plain, because by then he'd seen what fast money does to the soul, how it burns hot, blinds quick, and leaves folks too empty to rebuild. He'd seen what slow money could do too, how it grew roots that held communities together. His old city friends sometimes wrote him, asking if he missed the thrill of the chase. He'd write back, "I used to run after the wind, now I walk with it." In his later years, he took to sitting on the general store porch, same way Virgil and Jonah before him. Kids would come asking questions not about business, but about living. Mr. Yell, it charter bot ta-da, we got with grin, and say, "You don't thrive." With 10 some wrote books about it, calling it the silent economy or the compound of trust, but those who lived there never called it anything. To them, it was just life done right. When Eli turned 40, he sat by that same creek Clara once. Eli, they say, "How do you get rich?" He'd smile soft, tilt his hat back, and reply,
While losing interest in the word itself, he died one autumn night under a slow rain. No sickness, no warning. Good leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, humming that same tune the boards had been carrying for 100 years. When the townfolk found him, they didn't mourn loud. They just sat in silence, letting the humming lull leave the valley one more time. And sure enough, the next morning, carved right beneath his words by the creek, was another line. No one knew who wrote it. A hum don't die. It just finds a new set of hands. So it kept going, passing down like sunlight through dust, from Virgil to Jonah, Jonah to Clara, Clara to Eli, and now to whoever had the ears to hear. Maybe that hum reaching you right now, wandering out the fire edge, telling you to slow down, breathe deep, and start building something that'll still stand long after your boots stop walking. Years later, long after Eli last sunset, Marin Hollow had grown into something folks couldn't quite label.
Wasn't a town anymore in the usual sense. It was more like a rhythm made solid. The children who once played by the creek were now the keepers of trade, the stewards of story, the listeners of the hum. The world outside was still burning itself fast, talking louder, running harder. But Marin Hollow stayed slow, like a steady heart beating under the noise. One of those children, now grown, was a woman named May Holler. She wasn't born in Marin Hollow, but she might dead well have been. Her folks came raiding in from the north when she was 5, looking for work and ending up staying for peace. May grew up on stories of Jonah Patience, Clara Fund, and Eli Circle. She'd sit on the porch at dusk, listening to the elders talk about compound and not math, but in mercy. How kindness given time always found its way back with interest. She had a curious streak, though, the kind that made her want to understand how things worked, how the hum kept spreading, how a whole town could live near a century without greed eating it from the inside.
Or when she got older, she left for Estelle, heading east to study finance. The world she found there was shiny, clever, and restless. People talked fast, built faster, and slept less. They chased numbers on screens that blinked at fireflies on whiskey nights. Beautiful, but gone too soon. She tried to keep up. Worked for a big firm that moved millions before lunch, buying and selling companies like poker chips. She made more in a month than her pair did in a year, but each dollar felt weightless. There was no hum there, just static. She'd wake up in her city apartment and stare out the window at those lights that never turned off, and she'd think about the hollow, about how silence there felt alive and how silence in Eve felt like drowning. After 7 years, she quit, packed her bags, withdrew her savings, not to hoard but to build. She rode back to Marin Hollow under a wide summer sky, the air thick with memory. The general store was still there, though Della Rocker sat empty now. Russell still stood by the creek, tools lined neat, the carving still plain. Wealth is the et of patience. May decided to start something new, not a business, not quite a school. She called it the Listening Post. A small cabin with open doors and one big table. Folks from the hollow and beyond would come, sit, trade stories, talk about what they'd learned from the hum. No one lectured, no one charged. They listened. And in that listening, they built something invisible but mighty, a network of trust that stretched far beyond the valley. Traders from nearby towns began dropping by, curious about this silent place that made profit without pushing. Some came mocking, thinking they'd outsmart the simple folk. But when they left, they were quiet. Because Marin Hollow didn't sell wealth, it showed it. Every man and woman there lived debtless, land rich not by value but by legacy. They didn't fight over ownership because they understood what Eli meant when he said you can't own what you're meant to tend. May started keeping a new ledger not of money but of favors.
Every good deed was written down, every kindness logged, and though no one had asked to see it, the ledger stayed full, page after page. When someone fell on hard tides, the community flipped through the old entries and found a way to repay what was once given. That ledger became their bank, and though no dollar passed through it, it never ran dry. One autumn, a documentary crew came to film Marin Hollow. They wanted to understand how a place could run without investors, interest, or insurance. May let them film, but when they asked her for an interview, she smiled and said, "You can't capture a hum on camera." They left confused, but they caught something they didn't mean to, the sound of the wind passing through the grain fields, low and steady, like breath itself. When they played it back later, the crew swore they heard a rhythm, soft, like a heartbeat, the hum. As years passed, May aged the way folks do when they live right, not fast, not frail, just slower. She spent her evenings out by the fire, rain or shine, reading the old ledgers by lantern light. Travelers would stop by, ask if she had advice for getting rich. She'd chuckle, poke at the fire, and say, "Son, you don't get rich, you become rich. It's a growing thing, not a grabbing thing." And when she died, quiet, peaceful, same May those before her, the townsfolk that under the rain to lay her to rest near the creek. They opened her ledger one last time and found the final page had on 2 words, writ shaky but clear, still humming. They left it open on the porch of the Listening Post. That night, a storm rolled over the valley, the kind that rattles windows but cleans the air. When it passed, the whole town swore they heard the creek sing, low, steady, eternal, the same hum, now louder than them, traveling through every post, every plank, every soul that had took the time to listen. And that the thing about patience, it don't end with a man or a woman. It just changes hands. The hum don't belong to anyone. It belongs to time.
Silent, the fount of compounding in its truth formed the ed of every slow choice, every fair deal, every honest day stacked quietly on the next. It what builds kingdoms that don't need crowns and legacies that don't need names. So if you will find yourself sitting by a fire on a rain-heavy night, maybe let your thoughts quiet for a spell. Listen past the wind, past the hiss of the embers, past the world rushing to nowhere. You might yet hear it too, that low, steady hum traveling through generations, reminding you that wealth was never meant to be won, it was meant to be tended. Long after May passing, Marin Hollow became less of a place and more of a legend whispered across rail stops and dusty trails. Wanderers told of a valley where folks lived debtless, where crops grew thick without greed, and that the air itself seemed to hum with peace. Some called it superstition, others said it was luck, but a few, mostly the ones who'd lost everything in the world, hurried race, packed their bags and set out to find it. They were men and women worn thin by the city appetite for speed.
Folks who once believed fortune came from chasing instead of waiting. They came not to get rich, but to get right. One of those travelers was an older man named Tobias Crane. He'd seen the top of the world and the bottom of it too. Used to be a banker, the kind who built towers of paper taller than any mountain of stone. You wore fine suits, drove fine cars, and never once looked at the stars unless there was a contract signed beneath them. But when the market he'd helped build turned to ash, so did his life. The weight of what he'd done, ruined homes, lost pensions, all for profit, sat heavy on his chest. He couldn't sleep, couldn't breathe without the sound of his own regrets echoing in his ears. So one night, under a sky too big to ignore, Tobias sold what little he had left and started walking. For months he wandered aimless, till one evening a storm drove him off the road. He took shelter in the old barn on the edge of a valley, not knowing that he'd finally found Marin Hollow. When he woke the next morning, the rain had stopped and sunlight was spilling through the cracks in the boards like gold through a sieve. He followed the sound of a creek until he saw the words carved deep into the wood by the water edge. Words older than him, older than the noise of the world itself. Wealth is the ache of patience. He stood there for a long while, hand resting on the carving, feeling the groove of every let like a pulse. He didn't understand it fully, but he felt it, felt that hum everyone spoke of, rolling through the air like the last note of a hymn. The folks of Marin Hollow look him in, same as they had so many before. They didn't ask about his past, didn't care about what he'd lost or done. They just handed him a cup of coffee, showed him where the fences needed mending, and told him the rest would come with time. And it did, slowly, painfully, but honest. For the first time in his life, Tobias worked for something that didn't have numbers attached to it, learned to fix tools, patch roofs, and plant seed that wouldn't show reward for months. It humbled him, the way the earth refused to rush, the way every blade of grass seemed to teach him a lesson about patience. He started helping at the listening post, cleaning and organizing the ledgers May had left behind. At first, he couldn't wrap his mind around a ledger without money in it, but Teddy read through the names and favors entries like repaired wagon for Ruth, 2 loaves repaid, or help it dig well. Oh, the story. Paul's turned to years, and Tobias became the caretaker of the listening post. Travelers came and went, always asking about the hum. He'd smile, pour him a cup of strong brew, and say, "It ain't a sound, friend. It's a memory of good living that never fades." He started writing his own thoughts in the margins of May ledger, little reflections that weren't meant to teach, just to remember lines like patience ain't waiting.
Right in the soul remembers every death forgiven is one less ghost in your sleep. The slow road is the old one that lead home one autumn night.
A young man named Jesse came knocking at his door. Said he'd heard of Marin Hollow from a trader up north who swore it saved his life. Jesse was all nerves and ambition, talking fast about investments and opportunities. Tobias listened, let him run out of words, then asked one question. You had seen a field sprout twice in one day? Jesse blinked, said no. Tobias nodded slow. Then why'd you expect your life to? The boy stayed, worked alongside Tobias, learned the same lessons he once did, the ones the land teaches quiet, not loud. And when Tobias grew too old to lift tools, Jesse carried on the work, reading the ledgers out loud to new travelers, passing down what he'd learned, that money just a measure, but patience is a multiplier. In the end, Tobias didn't die rich in coin, but he died wealthy beyond reckoning. His funeral drew every soul from the hollow.
Set your pranks gonna marry now, like your shade away like wake, I didn't warn on like Daisy.
They buried him beside the creek near Clara and Eli carvings, and someone no one knows who etched one more line below them told them, "Sometime always remembers kindness." After that, the hum grew louder. Travelers who came through said it felt like the whole valley was breathing in rhythm, every leaf, every ripple, every beam in every home vibrating with life. The people of Marin Hollow didn't question it. They nodded and went on tending their lives, because they knew the hum wasn't magic, it was memory. The sound of a century worth of patience paying its dividends. Even now, if you were to walk down that same road Tobias did, through rain or moonlight, you'd hear it too. Not through your ears, but through your chest. That low, steady music of quiet work, honest trade, and love that outlasts its givers. It ain't just the hum of a place. It's the hum of a truth that never stops growing. What built slow will outlast what built fast. So sit by the fire, friend. Let the rain fall. Let the night stretch long. The hum's still playing, always has been, always will.
Time has a way of folding back on itself out in places like Marin Hollow. Years pass, generations come and go, but somehow the soil remembers the hands that once worked it. The barns stay standing as they were built slow, measured by rhythm, not by rush. Even the air seems thicker with memory, the kind that don't fade easy. Folks still come, though not a minute before. They arrive tired, hollow-eyed, city-worn, carrying dreams that have been chewed up by speed and spit out by noise. Some come looking for secrets, others for silence. But what they'll find if they stay long enough is something older than wealth, older than progress. They find pace. One such wanderer was a young woman named Hazel Brand. She came riding in one late spring afternoon with a pack on her shoulder and a book full of failed blueprints. She'd been an engineer in the city, building things faster than she could understand, and bridges, circuits, software, all designed for speed, for growth, for endless more. But one day the company folded overnight, and with it went her reason to keep going. She'd spent 10 years building without Dad touching the ground beneath her. So when she heard whispers of a valley that moved to a different tune, she followed the trail, not expecting much. When she first laid eyes on Marin Hollow, it didn't look like anything special. No paved roads, no towers, just a stretch of green stitched with fences and smoke curling gentle from chimneys. But the moment her boots hit the earth, she felt it. The hum, faint at first, like a memory half remembered, but real. The people welcomed her without question, gave her a place to rest, food to eat, and quiet to think. She didn't know it yet, but she'd come to rebuild more than machines. Days passed into weeks, and Hazel began to notice how everything in the hollow seemed to run without running. The mill turned slow, the crops grew sure, and trade happened without shouting or scheming. When she asked an old farmer how the system worked, he just said, "Ain't a system, Mom, at a circle. You give, you get, you wait, you gain." At first she thought it was nonsense. She was used to data, equations, and deadlines. But curiosity got the better of her. She started watching how the children shared tools instead of buying their own, how the shopkeepers rounded prices down instead of up, how nobody seemed to worry about tomorrow but still prepared for it anyway. It didn't make sense, and yet it worked. One evening, while sitting by the fire in the listening post, she found an old ledger tucked beneath the shelf. The pages were yellow and the ink faded, but the name on the cover caught her eye, Tobias Crane. Inside were notes and phrases that stopped her heart cold. Patience is just time choosing your side. Wealth without peace is debt in disguise. The hum ain't something you find, it's something you join. She closed the book slow, the words sitting in her chest like a seed waiting for rain. That night she walked out to the creek, same as so many before her, and traced the carvings in the wood. Each one told a story older than her entire bloodline. Clara, Eli, May, Tobias, they were ours still there, whispering through the bark and the water. And right there, standing beneath the stars, she finally understood what both those years of building had missed. It wasn't about efficiency, it was about endurance. The next morning, she went to the edge of town and began to build something new. Not for money, not for progress, but for balance. She called it the Foundry of Patience. It wasn't much at first, a workshop, as metal meant meaning, but instead of manufacturing for speed, she taught craft for purpose. Folks came to learn how to fix things, not replace them, to throw tools that lasted generations instead of seasons. Each piece made at the foundry bore a single mark, a small wave carved into the metal, a nod to the hum that carried through every trade, every handoff. Over time, her foundry became a beacon for those seeking a slower life. Artisans, traders, thinkers, wanderers, they came from all directions to learn her way. And though Hazel always said she wasn't teaching nothing new, they treated her words like gospel. She'd tell them, you can't rush what meant to last, steel just iron with patience. She lived to see the hollow bloom again, not in size, but in depth. The foundry work spread far knives that never dulled, plows that passed from parent to child, hinges that never creaked. Folks outside the valley started to notice. They called her the blacksmith of time, said she'd built an economy on stillness. She'd just laugh and say, no, I built it on listening. When Hazel passed, same made the rest, quiet, steady, under the hum, the people lived by the creek. They added her mark beneath the carvings, simple and true, still building. The foundry still stands to this day, its doors always open, its anvil still ringing soft through the hills. Some say when the hammer strikes just right, the sound blends with the hum, deep, warm, endless. You can almost hear all their voices in it. Jonah, Clara, Eli, May, Tobias,
Hazel, each one adding a verse to a song older than the town itself. A song that don't belong to any one of them, but to all of them. The hum of time, money, patience, and grace woven so tight together you can't tell what one ends and the other begins. And maybe that's the lesson Marin Hollow was always humming toward. That real wealth ain't found in what you hold, it's found in what you tend, what you teach, and what you leave humming after you're gone. So if you'll find yourself wandering far from home, carrying the weight of the world on your back, look for the quiet places, listen close. Somewhere in the rain or the wind or the low rumble of your own heart, you'll hear it. That soft, steady hum calling you back to the rhythm that never quits. Years rolled on a slow river bend, and Marin Hollow kept humming steady breath. Folks said it was changing, but not the way most towns do. It didn't sprawl or build higher, didn't chase lights or shine. No, it deepened. Roots sank lower, ties stretched wider, the kind of growing that happens quiet beneath the soil. The foundry still rang its patient rhythm, the creek still sang, and the ledgers at the listening post grew thicker, with entries that didn't mention money, but spoke of hands, hearts, and time. Somewhere in on that piece came a stranger named Abram Lowe. He was older than most travelers who found their way there, with a face like worn leather and eyes that seen too much. Folks could tell he'd once been a man of means. His boots were city-made, his coat was lined with old ambition. But the shine was gone. He didn't come to trade or to preach, he came to understand. When Abram arrived, the hollow was in the middle of what they called the quiet season. Crops had been dead, the fields left to rest, and the people turned inward for reflection. Every evening, lanterns glowed from porches, voices drifted across the valley, and laughter mixed with rain on tin roofs. He watched all of it, puzzled. He was a man of numbers, had spent 40 years calculating other men's worth, built a life on charts, models, and markets that moved faster than thought. But he'd lost something in the process, couldn't say what, that knew it was gone. The first few days, he didn't talk much. Helped carry wood, mended fences, shared meals with quiet gratitude. But after a week, he wandered into the listening post, drawn by the soft glow and the murmur of old stories. There, he met a woman named June Well, the last living apprentice of Hazel Brand. She was gay-haired now, hands strong from decades at the Advil, but her eyes still held that spark, the same one Hazel once carried when she built the foundry. June poured him a cup of slow-brewed coffee, then asked him, "You come looking for something or running from it?" Abram hesitated. "Maybe both," he said. She nodded. "Well, we don't have answers here. Just time." He smiled at that, though it wasn't the kind of smile a man wears easy. Over the next few weeks, he found himself coming back, drawn not by the talk, but by the silence between words. He listened to the stories of those who'd come before, the merchant who built without greed, the banker who found redemption in patience, the engineer who forged peace into steel, and slowly the noise inside him began to quiet. One evening, after a long rain, June took him to the creek. The carvings were still there, more now than then, names, words, little symbols etched into the wood and stone. Some so old the weather had half erased them, others fresh and sharp. Abram ran his fingers across each one, whispering the words as he went, still humming, still building, still listening. At June, what do they mean? She looked at him, then out toward the water. "They're promises," she said, "every one of them, to keep something going. The work, the patience, the care. The hum don't belong to us. It borrows our voices for a while." That night, Abram couldn't sleep. He walked the town alone, watching the lanterns flicker like fireflies. Everywhere he went, he heard the same sound, soft, deep, constant, not from the air, but from within himself. The hum, it was a breath like heartbeat, like the sound of all the patience he'd never practiced had hanging home at last. The next morning, he told June he wanted to contribute something. Not money. He'd already learned that kind of wealth didn't belong there, but skill. He still remembered numbers after out. So he began teaching the young folks of Marin Hollow how to keep ledgers not for profit but for postal work. He showed them how to track trade with care, how to balance generosity without loss. He called it the ledger of balance. It became the next chapter in the hollow, quiet history. Every entry told not just what was given, but how long it took to give it. Abram wrote lessons in the margins, the way Tobias once had. Every figure a story, don't count it, read it. Interest paid in time lasts longer than gold. The only real profit is peace. Years later, when Abram passed, June carved his name beside the creek and added one more phrase beneath it, still counting, still listening. And like those before him, his story folded into the hum. His teaching spread across the valley, passed down the gospel, not through sermons but through habits. Kids grew up learning not math but meaning. Traders left with more patience than goods. The hollow wealth deepened, quiet and invisible, and so it went. The hum endured through storms, droughts, births, burials. It carried on in the rhythm of work and rest, the way the rain found the river and the river found the sea. It wasn't about riches or recognition, it was about rhythm, the rhythm that binds every soul that sat by that fire, every heart that waited for something worth waiting for. So if you're sitting by your own campfire someday and the rain starts falling soft and the night grows still, listen close. Maybe you'll hear it too, the hum that been rolling through time, telling the same old truth in 1,000 quiet ways. Patience pays in peace. As the generations turn, the hollow never forgot the sound that bound them all together. The hum still lingered through the valley, stretching across the misty mornings in the long gold of dusk. A wold out of the foundry rose from the creek and whispered between the eaves of old barns that still stood straight aid prayers. Children grew up knowing it before they could read, and elders carried it its breath to their last day. It wasn't taught anymore. It was caught. Same way a spark catches dry kindling. A few tried to explain it in books or lectures, but the truth was too simple and too deep for that patience. Had become the hollow currency, and gratitude its language. And then one autumn, a young writer named Sami Dell wandered in. He wasn't a cowboy, nor a banker, nor a craftsman. He was just tired. Tired in that way only modern folk can be. His words, once sharp as spurs, had turned hollow. He'd written stories for the restless tales of quick winds and brighter tomorrows, but he'd never written one that stayed. His publisher told him he needed something new, something authentic, but what he really needed was something real. He'd heard the legend of Marin Hollow from an old rancher at a truck stop. The man said, "They're a place where folks still trade time instead of money. You can hear the land breathe if you stay still long enough." Samir had laughed it off then, but a month later, burned out, broke, and fresh off a rejection letter, he found himself driving toward those same hills. He didn't expect much. But when he stepped out of his car that first misty dawn, boots sinking into dew-heavy grass, he felt the hum underfoot. It wasn't loud, not even clear. It was more like the world had a pulse again, and he'd just been deaf to it in his life. They gave him a cabin near the edge of the hollow and told him to rest. That was the first order of business for all newcomers, rest before you reckon. He tried to write those first few days, but nothing came. Every word felt forced, artificial, so he stopped trying. Instead, he started listening to the sound of the hammer at the foundry, to the rustle of corn stalks in the wind, to the low murmur of laughter drifting from the listening post after sundown. Each sound layered on the next till it formed something larger, a living rhythm. Over time, he met the keepers of the hollow legacy, June Weller, still strong despite her age, who ran the foundry with a calm that could settle storms, the teacher Jonah, grandson, who taught arithmetic with Abram Ledger of Balance, says his text. The farmers, the weavers, the singers, they all worked slow and lived full. No rush, no competition. Every action seemed woven to purpose. One night, Sami sat with June by the fire and asked her the same question every outsider eventually asked. What keeps this place running? She poked at the embers with a stick and said, "Stories, stories," he asked. She nodded. Every hand that had worked this land left one behind. The hum ain't nothing mystical, son. It just all their stories layered together. The trick is you can't rush to tell one, you gotta live it first. That struck him deep. The next morning he stopped writing for the market and started writing for the hum. He filled his notebook not with plots or profits, but with what he saw and heard, the rhythm of rain on tin, the steady breath of a blacksmith bellows, the way folks said thank you without words, worked the fields in the daytime, wrote by lantern light at night, and slowly his pages began to hum too. Months passed. Seasons turned. And by the time he realized it, he'd written not a novel, but a chronicle, a living testament to patience, kindness, and the quiet strength of steady work. He titled it The Hum That Built Us. When he finished, He wrote the first copy to the listening post, laying it on the same shelf that held the ledgers of Tobias and Abram. He didn't sell the book, didn't publish it. Instead, he left it for anyone who needed it. Some read it and wept, some left their own notes in the margins, additions, reflections, small truths they'd there. And over the years, it became what the hollow wall, the living ledger. It traveled far beyond those hills. Travelers took copies with them, spreading its words across towns, cities, even countries. But no matter how far it went, the hollow stayed quiet. Folks there never sought fame or fortune. They just kept humming. And through those pages, through that story of slow living and patient gain, the hum spread wider than it had before. Years later, when Samir was gone, the people carved his name into the creek edge beside all the others. Below it, they wrote one last promise, simple as truth itself. Still telling Rand with that, the story joined the rest. Not an ending, yet another verse in a song that never stopped singing. The hollow went on, changing with the times, yet never losing its soul. Every generation added to the hum, not through wealth or progress, but through quiet acts of care, the kind no one notices till they're gone. So now, when the rain falls on Marin Hollow and the campfires burn low, you can still hear it, soft and low, like an old cowboy strumming a tune to the rhythm of his heartbeat. It ain't the sound of ghosts or miracles, it's the sound of people who learn the richest truth there is. You don't have to own the world to outlast it. You just have to tend your part with patience. And that, friend, is how the hum lives on, years after Samir's story had settled into the bones of the valley. Marin Hollow stood like a memory stitched into the world fabric, a place that time respected too much to hurt. Travelers still came and went, each drawn by yon whisper they couldn't quite name, and each leaving with a little less weight on their souls. But the hollow had grown in ways no one expected. It was not bigger nor louder, it was wider. Its lessons had spilled into places far beyond the hills, carried on voices, ink, and the quiet ache of those who longed for meaning in a world that had forgotten the sound of stillness. In a distant city, one that never truly slept, there was a man named Elias Moore. He built his fortune in what folks called the New Frontier Marketplace, made not of goods but of data. He was the kind of man who could turn numbers into gold with a single click. And yet, for all his success, he couldn't find a reason to smile that was not bought. The more he earned, the hollower he felt. He'd read the living ledger once during a storm that grounded his private plane. He'd picked it out of boredom and finished it out of something else. Something he didn't recognize years later. The words had stuck with him, humming faint beneath the clatter of his busy life. Patience pays in peace. For a long while, he'd ignored it, but the world he'd helped build fast, hungry, endless, had started to eat itself alive. Burnout was not a risk anymore, it was a rhythm. Somewhere in that madness, Elias began to hear it again, the hum, not loud, not near, but constant, like a call from a place that still remembered how to breathe. So one day, without announcement, he left, sold his companies, liquidated his holdings, and vanished from the skyline. The world called him mad. Investors cursed his name. But Elias didn't care. He followed the sound that had haunted him for decades, the hum beneath the noise. When he reached Marin Hollow, the air was thick with autumn gold. The same valley Samir once walked still rolled out beneath the sun, soft and eternal. He found the foundry first, its doors wide open, and stepped inside. The smell of iron and cedar hit him like a memory from a life he never lived. Behind the anvil stood a young woman with soot-streaked cheeks and eyes that burned like dawn. "Can I help you, stranger?" she asked, not unkindly. He smiled, a little awkward, a little tired. "I think so," he said. "I'm looking for something I can't name." The woman chuckled, wiped her hands, and said, "Then you're in the right place." Her name was Mira Brand, descendant of Hazel, keeper of the foundry flame. She'd been born into the hum, raised on its stories and shaped by its stillness. Under her care, the foundry had become more than a workshop. It was a forge for purpose. Each creation, whether a knife, a hinge, or a tool, was made to matter, to last, to carry its maker patience into the hands of whoever used it next. Elias watched her work for hours, the rhythm of her hammer sinking with the beat of his own heart. There was nothing hurried about it, nothing wasteful. Every strike was deliberate, every pause necessary. It was art disguised due endurance. When she finally looked up, She said, "You got the look of a man who used to run fast but forgot where to." He laughed. "A sound rough from disuse." "You're not wrong," he said. "How'd you learn to slow down like that?" Mira shrugged. "Didn't learn it, listened to it. The hum tells us when to move." That night, Elias sat by the same creek where Tobias once carved his promise, where Hazel built her peace, where Samid left his words. He ran his fingers along the wood, finding the marks that told a story longer than any book. For the first time, he understood what it meant to earn rest. Not buy it, not steal it, earn it. He stayed in the hollow for weeks, then months, then longer still. He never returned to the city. Instead, he began teaching the hollow something it didn't then have, a bridge to the outside world, not for profit, but for preservation. He called it the exchange of still hands. Through it, crafts from Marin Hollow reached places that had forgotten how to wait. The vivid tools, pottery, journals, all made with patience, each carrying a small mark, a wave carved in the corner, same Abe Hazel first steel. They weren't sold through algorithms or auctions, but through trust. Buyers had to write why they wanted it and what they'd do with it. Only then would Mira or one of her apprentices decide if it would leave the valley. And somehow, against state reason, it worked. Demand grew, but never faster than supply. The exchange ran on the same law as the hum. What meant to be yours will wait for you. Word spread. Cities started to slow down, even if just a little. People began mending instead of replacing, sharing instead of storing. They faded the still movement. But in the hollow, they just taught it another verse in the song. When at last grew old, he built himself a cabin near the foundry, where the hum was loudest. He'd sit on the porch each evening, watching the forge light dance across the valley, and say to the young ones who came to visit, "Don't chase success. It faster than you. Build stillness instead. Or I'd last you." And when his time came, they buried him by the creek, next to Samir and Hazel and the others who tended the hum before him. On the wooden cross above his resting place, they carved one more phrase, short, simple, true, still breathing. Now when travelers pass through Marin Hollow, they see that same cross gleaming in the dusk, and if they stop, they swear they can hear it, that low, endless rhythm of hammers, wind, and hearts all moving they one. The hum, the song of patience, of balance, of quiet wealth that no market can measure. Though the world outside still spins too fast, there will always someone, somewhere, who hears that sound and remembers that peace ain't earned by rushing, get found by listening. Decades drifted by like smoke curling from an old campfire, soft and certain, until Marin Hollow became less a place you could find on a map and more a name spoken in reverence. Folks still tried to visit, of course, wanderers, scholars, dreamers, and tired men with callous souls. But more often than not, those who found their way there didn't come because of a road. They came to something inside them stirred, humming first. That hum would start quiet like a tremor under the heart and grow until it pulled him away from noise and neon toward the sound of piecework and slow. By then, Mira Brand had passed the foundry to her apprentice, a boy named Jonas Eden, with a steady hand and a poet's silence. He wasn't one for talking much, but every nail, every clasp, every horseshoe that came from his forge told a story. Under his care, the exchange of still hands grew roots in faraway places, not at a company, not at a brand, but at a whisper, a movement that spread through people who longed for stillness. Folks began building smaller, living slower, planting gardens and alleys and songs in silence. They stopped calling it the movement. They called it the return. One day Jonas received a letter, not the kind typed out and stamped, but written by hand in ink that trembled with age. It came from a man named Thomas Vale, a historian from the far north. He claimed he'd found something old records, ledgers, and letters, all connecting back to the hollow earliest days. Tobias' handwriting, Hazel sketches, Abram careful equations. Thomas said he was dying, but he wanted to return these relics to their home. So Jonas hitched up his wagon and set out to meet him, a rare thing for a hollow man to do. The journey was long, cutting through places that had forgotten the art of quiet. He passed through towns lit too bright, filled with men talking too loud. Everywhere he went, he felt the hum fade beneath the roar of hurry. But when he finally reached the northern hills, there stood Thomas' frail, thin than a shadow, but eyes alight like a man who'd spent a lifetime looking for something and had just found it. They talked through the night beside a small fire, the flames reflecting off parchment yellowed by years. Thomas told Jonas about the world endowed, the markets that rose and fell like tides, the people drowning in their own rush, and the few who had found solace in the hollow ways. "You don't know what you've done," he said, voice trembling. "You didn't save a town, you saved time itself." Jonas didn't answer. He just poured him a cup of tea and said, "We only borrowed it." When Thomas passed that winter, Jonas brought the papers home. The hollow lived for days reading through those relics, their words that echoes from old ghosts. The earliest sketches of the foundry showed a forge smaller than a man reached. The first ledger spoke not of money, but of promises kept. The oldest note from Hazel read, "Steel remembers the hand that shaped it." They bound those writings together with leather and laid them in the center of the listening post where the hum seemed loudest. The people called it the Book of Hands. No one owned it, no one claimed it. It simply was a record of all that patience had built. Years later, scholars came to study it. Anonymous, philosophers, monks, and even children of the hurried world who'd grown curious about a town where wealth wasn't measured in coin. Some tried to quantify it, to put numbers to the hum, to turn stillness into science. But they always left humble, for there was no metric for peace, no formula for faith. The hollow way couldn't be bought, sold, or taught. It could only be caught, the same way a flame catches when the night just cold enough to need it. And as the world spun faster, Marin Hollow grew quieter. The people built less, talked less, but loved deeper. When one neighbor passed, the others didn't mourn quick. They took their time, sat by the creek, told stories, carved names, and listened to the hum carry that soul forward. It became their ceremony, their rhythm of remembering. If it's one spring morning, Jonas woke before dawn and walked to the ridge above the hollow. He'd grown old by then, beard white, eyes soft, hands rocked by decades of patience. From that ridge he could see the foundry below, its chimney whispering gay smoke into the sunrise. He could see the creek glinting silver, the carved words stretching like a scripture of time. And somewhere in the air, that old hum wrapped around him, that steady, timeless, eternal. He smiled and said aloud, "To no one and everyone at once, still humming, are we?" The wind answered him, not with sound, but with stillness, the kind that feels like an embrace, and that was enough. When Jonas Eden passed, the hollow did what it always did. It listened. His apprentices lit the forge one last time, letting its light burn through the night. They carved his name beneath the others at the creek and added another promise beneath it. Still learning, in time, the Book of Hands became a pilgrimage piece. People from every corner of the world came to sit by that fire, hold that book, and listen. Some stayed for a night, some never left, and every one of them, no matter what they came from, left their mark, not just in ink or wood, but in rhythm. The hum had spread far beyond the hollow now, but those who'd heard it knew one truth clear as starlight. The richest man ain't the one who gathers the most, but the one who can sit through the longest silence and smile. And so Marin Hollow kept breathing, quiet, eternal, still. By the time another century rolled its shadow across the hills, Marin Hollow was a myth to most of the world. Cities had grown tall again, steel and glass, trying to outshine the sun, and folks had returned to their rush, their endless hunger for more. Yet somewhere beneath all that noise, the hum persisted. Not loud enough to command attention, but steady enough to endure. It thrived in quiet corners, inside Potter studios, in the hands of old carpenters, in the voices of singers who still believed music should heal, not sell. And sometimes on nights when the rain fell soft against window panes, you could hear it in the slow tick of a clock that refused to hurry. Far beyond the hollow, across ocean and into a city that never slept, there lived a woman named Lila West. She was the kind of person born into motion, her life a blur of deadlines, meetings, and screens. Her parents had been dreamers once, but life and rent had taught them that dreams didn't pay bills. They built her a future of efficiency instead. Never stop moving, her father told her. The world rewards those who don't wait, and for years she believed him. She climbed her ladders, made her millions, and filled her walls with awards that glittered like lies. But the higher she rose,
The less she slept, her mind buzzed like a wire stretched too tight, and the nights she'd sit in her office, watching the rain hit the glass, feeling like the whole world was moving too fast for her to see it anymore. Then one evening, while sorting through an old box of books left behind by her grandfather, she found it an aged leather-bound volume titled The Book of Hands. The pages smelled of cedar and rain. The first words she saw were written in faded ink. Patience shapes the world faster than ambition had could. She turned another page, then another. Names she'd never heard, places long gone. Words written not to impress, but to remind. There were drawings of forges, of creeks, of hands holding each other steady through the weight of years. And at the very end, there was a seal note. If you find this, listen before you build. Lila closed the book and sat in silence for the first time in years. And in that silence, she thought she heard it, the faint tint hum, soft as a memory. That night, she couldn't sleep. The city lights outside her window burned too bright, her phone buzzed too loud, and her thoughts ran too fast. So before dawn, she packed a bag, left a note on her desk that said only gone listening, and boarded a train west. She didn't know when Marin Hollow was, not really. But the hum, once it etches you, don't let go. It pulls you the way a compass points north, quiet, sure, unyielding. Her journey took weeks. She rode trains till they stopped, buses till they broke, then walked till the pavement turned to dirt and the dirt to grass. And one gray morning, when the fog hung thick in wool, she saw it, a valley cut into gold and green, let smoke curled from a distant chimney, and the sound of a hammer echoed faint through the mist. She had found Marin Hollow. It wasn't what she expected. There were no signs, no gates, no grand declarations. Just people living slow, deliberate, kind. A child laughing by the creek, a woman humming while mending a coat, a man splitting wood with the rhythm of an old song. Lila felt like she'd stepped into another world, one that had refused to forget what mattered. She met the keeper of the foundry, a tall woman with calm eyes and arms strong from work. Her name was Mara Eden, descendant of Jonas. Lila showed her the book, explaining how she'd found it and how it had changed her. Mara smiled, brushed a bit of ash from her hands, and said, "You didn't find it, dear. It found you." That night, they sat by the forge glow while rain tapped soft against the tin roof. Mara told her the story of the hollow, of Tobias and Hazel, of Samir and Elias, of all the souls who'd lived by the hum. Each name carried its own kind of light, and Lila felt herself settling into their rhythm, her heartbeat slowing for the first time in years. She asked, "Can I stay?" Mara nodded. "You can stay long as you're listening." So Lila stayed. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. She learned to craft simple things, bowls, hinges, spoons. At first her hands trembled, too used to keyboards and touch screens. But over time, the forge taught her the same thing it had taught everyone before her. There a wisdom in the weight. Every strike must father breath, every creation must carry purpose. She started writing again, though not the kind of writing she'd known before. She wrote letters to people she'd once worked with, short notes, not to preach, but to remind. "Try waiting 5 minutes before you answer that email," one said. "Look out before you scroll," said another. Some ignored her, some laughed, but a few listened. And like every good hum, those few became many. Years later, when Mara grew old, she passed the foundry to Lila. "The flame yours now," she said. "Don't guard it, share it." And that's what Lila did. She started what folks would later call the Ember Network, a small collection of towns, workshops, and communities built around patience, balance, and the dignity of slow work. They traded goods, shared stories, and taught their children not to fear time, but to trust it. Across continents, people began lighting forges again, singing songs while they worked, rebuilding a world that had almost forgotten the sound of care. And through it, the hum endured. You could hear it in every hammer, every laugh, every breath between notes of silence. It wasn't about money anymore. It never really had been. It was about a kind of wealth no bank could hold, a richness of heart, of slowness, of soul. They carved Lila's name beside the others when her time came. Beneath that, they etched one final phrase. Still listening. Let's so the hum lived on, louder than hair, quiet as, waiting for whoever next to hear it. Some say it's still out there, hiding beneath the rush of rain, humming through the campfires and smokestacks of dreamers yet to come. It ain't magic, it memory, it hope, it patience turned to sound. And if you sit real still tonight, friend, if you let the rain fall soft and the fire crackle low, you might just hear it too.
That same steady hum, the one that built fortunes out of faith and turned time into treasure, the hum that never ends. Long after Leela time, the hollow story slipped into that quiet place where history fades into legend. Folks out there in the cities called it folklore. Some sail about patience and forges, about hands that shaped the world slower but sure. Yet even the skeptics, deep down, wanted it to be true. There was something too human in it to dismiss completely. And every once in a while, someone would swear they'd seen it, a flash of golden valley through the fog, a whisper of a forge humming somewhere far off, a light that never went out. One of those ones was a boy named Isaac Rowe. He was born 200 years after the last record of Marin Hollow had been written. The world by then had turned back to Russian faster than death. Machines ran everything, trains without conductors, farms without farmers, stories written by wires and not hearts. People called it the Great Automation Age. And while it made the world richer in coin, it made souls poorer than end. Isaac didn't fit in much.
Real kind of curious, always taking things apart just to see how they work, but he never cared much for the new devices that thought for you. His granddad used to tell him stories of the hum, about how once, long ago, a valley full of people found peace in work and wealth in stillness. Isaac had thought it was just an old man bedtime story, but when his granddad passed, he left behind a letter, sealed in wax, with one line written on the front: "Find the hum, and you'll find yourself." Inside was a small brass compass. Odd thing was, it didn't point north. Its needle spun until Isaac held it still, and then, only then, it would quiver and settle, not toward magnetic pull, but toward something else. He spent years on it. Not all at once, mind you, life still demanded its dues. But whenever that compass trembled, he packed his bag and went where it told him. It led him through mountains and forests, through towns that barely existed anymore, through places so quiet you could hear the world remember itself.
And every stop seemed to hold a trace, an old coin stamped with a wave, a forged handle engraved with initials, up by any dog and B, a rusted plate etched with the words, "Still learning." He began to believe his journey ended, or maybe began, on a stormy night in a valley none of his maps showed. The air was thick, the rain heavy, and just as his lantern flickered out, he saw it faint light from a forge burning steady against the wind. When he stepped inside, there was no one there, only warmth. The walls were lined with tools, each marked with a name. Dust lay thick, but the forge was alive. The hum was real. He set the compass on the eval, and the needle stopped moving. It pointed straight down. Beneath the iron carved deep into the stone were words worn smooth by time. If you found this flame, you're meant to carry it. Isaac laughed softly, half in disbelief, half in awe. He spent the night there, feeding the forge and reading what little remained of the hollow records. Pages half burned, but the message was clear. Work slow, work true, work kind. That was all it needed to be.
The morning came.
The rain stopped. The valley looked alive again, wildflowers growing between stones, the creek whispering below. He stayed there for a while, rebuilding the place bit by bit, cleared out the soap, reforged old tools, found ways to make life without wires. He didn't call it a business, didn't even call it a home. It was a promise kept. Word got round, and it always does when truth starts breathing. Travelers began showing up, at first a few wanderers, then families, then whole groups of folk who'd grown tired of chasing noise. They didn't come to buy or to build fortunes. They came to learn how to stop hurrying. Isaac taught him what the forge had taught him, that every flame needs air, not rushed, that every dream worth keeping must be tended, not forced, that silence is not empty at waiting. He built a new forge beside the old one, not repressing it, but continuing it, same as those before him had done. He named it the hearth. It was not grand, just a stone circle, invalid, its hard benches all around. Every even and after the day work was done, folks lived around it. They shared what they'd made, what they'd learned, what they'd lost. Sometimes they just sat there, watching the sparks climb toward the stars. No one needed to speak much. The hum said all that needed sand. Years passed. Isaac grew older, slower, wiser. But his forge burned steady, and the people who came to the hollow began to build small villages of their own across the world. Some in deserts, some in mountains, zed near oceans. They thought themselves keepers of the hum. Not a religion, not a company, just a kinship, bound by quiet. Their creed was short: make with meaning, rest with reason, leave with love. Under Isaac's guidance, the keepers started what became the silent ledger, a record not of money, but of moments. Each entry held a story: a family that rebuilt its home after a storm, a farmer who found peace watching his field instead of worrying over it, a teacher who taught patience before arithmetic. The ledger grew, page by page, till it was too big to hold in one place, so they didn't. They spread it out, each keeper holding one story, one lesson, one memory. That way, the hum could never die. When old time became, he didn't leave a will or a fortune. He left on that same compass, sitting atop the anvil, its needle spinning freely once more. The forge stayed lit for 7 nights straight, the people taking turns tending it on. The 8th morning, the fire dimmed, but not out, just resting, waiting. They buried Isaac beside the creek where the hum had first begun. His epitaph was simple, still teaching what so it went. The valley, the forge, the hum, never loud, never lost, always waiting for the next weary traveler to find it in. At somewhere out there tonight, beyond the rushing lights and digital noise, maybe there another compass trembling in a young hand. Maybe another wanderer heart is hearing that old whisper again. Maybe the hum already calling. It always does. Jinnering rolled forward like a slow river, carving new bends through time while the heart of the hollow stayed steady. The world outside had changed beyond recognition. Flying ships stitched the sky. Trade flowed faster than thought, and men built fortunes out of ideas rather than iron. But for all its flash and speed, something ancient kept whispering through the cracks. It called itself by no name, yet it was known to all who stopped long enough to listen. The hum in the far edge of the northern territories, where the land met the glassy sea, there stood a small settlement known simply as Hollowby. Built by the descendants of the keepers, it was on any digital grid, nor mapped by the data webs that could cross it the planet. We could only find it by feel, or maybe by fate. And though time had given it new tools and brighter lights, it still carried that same rhythm of slow hands and humble hearts. Among the new generation was a young woman named Ora Vale. She was a dreamer born into a restless age, one that promised her instant everything, instant meals, instant messages, instant meaning, but none of it stuck. The faster life got, the emptier it felt. Ora spent her days working a code write for a company that built artificial traders' machines that could gamble entire fortunes in the blink of an eye and win more often than men could think. She was good at it too, better than most. Yet every time her system turned a profit, a small ache grew behind her ribs, the kind that no number could silence. One night, wandering through the archives of old net records, she stumbled on a fragment, a scan of a handwritten ledger labeled Silent Ledger Keeper Copy, Hollow of Marin. The page showed a sim-lied in faded script. Wealth unlistened to is wealth unkept. It was signed simply, I wrote, or a pause, scrolling back to check the archive origin. The file came from an old United server, now defunct, but the coordinates matched no city she'd heard of. Something about the phrasing wealth unlistened to hooked her deeper than any code had. She spent the night searching every trace she could find of Marin Hollow, but the digital world had little to offer. Only myths, only whispers. The next morning, she packed her small sachets, left a note for her superiors saying she needed quiet research time, boarded the first supply ship bound for the northern coast. When the captain asked where exactly she was going, she smiled faintly and said, "Wherever the hum waiting." The old sailor just nodded, as if he'd heard that type of answer before. After a week voyage and a day hike inland, she found it not by sight but by feel. The compass app on her wrist pad stopped working. Her comms lost signal, the wind slowed, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Then she saw the valley golden fields under gay skies, smoke drifting soft from a forge that should have rusted centuries ago. The sign above the entrance read, "The Hearth." The air carried the scent of oak and metal and memory. An elder greeted her, eyes sharp-bead river stones. "You're late," he said, not unkindly. "We've been expecting someone." She blinked, caught between disbelief and awe. "Expecting? You don't even know who I am. Maybe not your name," he said, smiling, "but we know the sound your heart makes." They led her through the forge, showing her relics older than nation's tools once held by the first keepers, fragments of the Book of Hands, even a brass compass, needles still twitching as though the valley pulse ran through it. Every object hummed faintly when touched, a low vibration that settled into her bones. It felt like remembering something she'd never lived. Over time, she learned their ways. They no longer worked iron alone. They worked data, wood, sound, and soil alike, treating each with the same reverence. The forge wasn't just a workshop anymore. It was a library of patience. Everything they built followed one rule: no creation without stillness. Aura started rebuilding old systems the hollow way, algorithms that paused before acting, devices that only worked if the user met a full breath first, machines that listened before, respond in. At first, the world outside laughed. A delay is inefficiency, they said. A pause is weakness. But then something unexpected happened. Those who used her designs reported fewer errors, longer lifespans, calmer men. The hum had found its way into circuits. Within a decade, her creation spread across continents, not as products, but as philosophies. Cities began slowing down, not all at once, but enough to notice. Trains left on time but arrived with more grace. Marked algorithms skipped their frantic cycles and started measuring long-term balance instead of flash profit. The rush of the world softened to a rhythm again. Aura never taught herself a leader. She just said she was listening forward, and when her hair turned silver, she built one last project. A digital archive encoded with a question rather than an answer. It was called the listening engine. Anyone who asked it a question got back silence first, then a fill line of text drawn from the ledger. What are you rushing toward that patience? Couldn't build better. Some called it art. Some called it madness. But those who used it, truly used it, began to change. They started taking walks again, writing by hand again, thinking before speaking again. The hum had gone electric, but it hadn't lost its soul. On her final night, Aura sat by the sea that bordered the hollow. The waves lapped in soft breath. The compass, Isaac old one, rested in her palm. It no longer spun. It pointed steady, right out across the horizon. She smiled, leaning back beneath the endless sky, whispering, "Still listening, old friend." When they found her the next morning, she was gone. No trace but the compass, humming faint, its needle glowing warm in the dawn light. The elders placed it on the forge, same as all the others before her. The flame flickered once, then burned steady again, and from that day forward, the people of the hollow didn't just listen to the hum. They spoke with it. Every breath, every word, every act of patience added to its rhythm. It became the pulse of the world itself. Not a legend, not a story, just truth sung slow through time. And if you're real quiet, sitting under rain or stars, you might catch it too, the sound that's been echoing since the first hammer struck the first spark. That old hum, steady and sure, waiting for the next soul who remembers that fortune was never made of gold, only time well tended. The decades that followed Aura passing carried her legacy like wind through wheat, quiet, unseen, but felt everywhere. Her listening engine became more than a curiosity. It turned into a compass for an age that had nearly forgotten the virtue of stillness. It spread not through power or advertisement, but through whispers, much like the hum itself. When cities burned out from their own speed, when markets cracked under their own weight, people turned once more toward the question Aura had left them. What are you rushing toward that patience couldn't build better? That question built the era of quiet growth. Towns began forming around centers of measured industry, but progress moved slow but steady. These places thrived on a new kind of wealth, one that couldn't be counted, only lived. Families shared their work openly, teaching strangers the craft of patience. Corporate crumbled, replaced by guilds of trust. The hollow became a symbol again, though fewer found the real one. They didn't need to. The hum had spread so far it lived in every town that honored stillness. In one such town, Salmir, a seaside settlement built atop the remnants of a forgotten city, there lived the old man named Dorian Pike. He was a quiet sort, known for fixing broken things others gave up on. Watches that had stopped for decades, radios that hadn't sung since the war, instruments that had lost their tune. He never charged more than a few coins or a loaf of bread. Folks said he had a gift, but Dorian always shook his head and said, "Ain't no gift, just listening proper." Behind his shop stood a small forge, not for iron, but for thought. He called it the still room. Every evening he'd sit there, humming along to the rhythm of his tools, the sea whispering outside. Be impin' a bit.
Zolmir. These places thrived on a new kind of wealth, one that couldn't be counted, only lived. Families shared their work openly, teaching strangers the craft of patience. Corporate crumbled, replaced by guilds of trust. The hollow became a symbol again, though few have found the real one. They didn't need to. The hum had spread so far it lived in every town that honored stillness. In one such town, Zolmir, a seaside settlement built atop the remnants of a forgotten city, there lived the old man named Dorian Pike. He was a quiet sard, known for fixing broken things others gave up on. Watches that had stopped for decades, radios that hadn't sung since the war, instruments that had lost their tune. He never charged more than a few coins or a loaf of bread. Folks said he had a gift, but Dorian always shook his head and said, "Ain't no gift, just listening proper."
Behind his shop stood a small forge, not for iron, but for thought. He called it the still room. Every evening he'd sit there humming along to the rhythm of his tools, the sea whispering outside. Some nights, travelers would come by, drawn by the faint light and the strange comfort that clung to the air. Dorian welcomed them all with tea and a place to rest. No talk of business, no chatter of news, just quiet, sometimes a tune. One winter, a young boy wandered into Zolmir, barefoot, hungry, eyes full of storm. Said his name was Ash. He'd run from one of the new cities to the south, one that had fallen back into the old ways of rush and greed. They'd promised work and riches, but all he found was noise. When he stumbled upon Dorian's shop, the old man saw something familiar in him. "You looking for a meal or something that lasts longer?" he asked. The boy shrugged. Both, maybe so. Dorian took him in, fed him, gave him boots, and set him to work fixing clocks. The boy had no patience at first, hands too fast, heart too tired. But the forge teaches everyone the same way, through failure. The more he rushed, the more things broke. The slower he moved, the truer they ticked. Over time, Ash began to feel the rhythm, not just of the gears, but of life itself. Every click of a cog became a heartbeat, every turn of a screw a lesson in stillness. When he grew older, Dorian told him stories by the sea of Leela West, who found the hollow of Isaac Rowe, who kept it alive of Ora Vale, who wrote it into the age of light. "You see, boy," Dorian said one night, the waves glowing silver under moonlight, all of them were listening to the same thing. Not a sound that more like a truth humming under the bones of the world. That the hum, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Ash carried that hum with him. When Dorian passed peacefully, eyes open to the dawn, the boy buried him beside the shore, in the place that the tide whispered soft tests. On his gravestone he carved 3 words, "Still fixing hearts." Afterward, Ash left Zolmir, traveled far and wide, teaching what Dorian had taught him. He fixed machines in cities that had forgotten how to slow down, told stories in towns that had lost their purpose, and reminded strangers that no life breaks beyond repair if you take time enough to mend it. They started calling him the Wandering Tinker. Some said he was mad, some said he was blessed, but wherever he went, peace followed like a shadow. One night, deep in the dunes of an empty desert, Ash came upon a group of miners struggling to restart an old energy well. The machine was ancient, rusted, screaming full of heat, but no life. He told them to stop, to breathe, to listen. At first they laughed, but the youngest among them humored him. Together they sat still in the sand until the wind died down and the stars showed themselves. Only then did Ash strike the first spark. The machine roared to life, not wild, but steady. The miners stared in disbelief. "How'd you do that?" one asked. Ash smiled. "Didn't do nothing but wait. That mind became the first listening well. It powered not through force, but rhythm, its gears moving with the natural pulse of the earth beneath." Soon, others followed. Whole networks of quiet energy, built not to conquer the world, but to live with it. And at the heart of each was a whisper of that same old hum, still teaching, still guiding. Ash never took credit. When people asked his name, he'd chuckle. Name don't matter, or only the hum does. Some say he's still out there, wandering the edges of maps, mending what been rushed, teaching what been forgotten. Others believe he found the hollow again and laid down his tools beside the forge, ready to rest. Either way, his story carried on through every quiet place that healed itself by listening. The world, for all its cycles of noise and silence, never lost the hum again. It became the foundation of a new kind of wealth. Not coins, not data, but time shared and moments unmeasured. In every small workshop, in every whispered campfire tale, in every slow breath between work and rest, the hum still sings. It don't ask for nothing but ears to hear. Years passed, and what began they to whisper turned into the rhythm of entire civilization. The listening wells lit the world not with blinding brilliance, but with a steady golden glow that mirrored the calmness of those who tended them. Cities no longer clawed at the sky with glass towers. Instead, they sank gently into the earth, built with the land rather than on top of it. Folks worked side by side again, not for profit, but for purpose. The hum had woven itself into a part of daily life, a quiet reminder that the true riches were those that endured long after the noise faded. By this time, stories of the old hollow had taken on the shape of legend. Most believed it gone, swallowed by time and weather, but a few still searched, not for glory, not even for proof, but for belonging. Among them was an old historian named Elias Finch. He'd spent half a lifetime studying the old ledgers, following every scrap of parchment, every trace of a name that had passed through the hollow forge. His peers called him a fool for chasing ghosts, but Elias had something they didn't, a memory from childhood. He remembered sitting on his grandmother's porch, rain tapped soft against the roof. She used to hum when she rocked in her chair, low and tuneless, yet strangely familiar. When he asked what song it was, she said, "Ain't no song, boy." Just listening to what the world's saying, it wasn't until he grew older that he realized she'd been humming the hum. That memory stayed with him on his days, whispering him onward when reason said stop. Elias' journey led him to the far west, where desert met forest and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. He carried with him one of ash-repaired compasses, its needle dancing soft, though alive. On the 43rd day of travel, he reached a ridge overlooking a wide plain bathed in twilight, and there, faint but certain, he heard it, the low thrum of life itself, pulsing steady beneath the wind. He followed it down through the stone path, step by step, till he came upon a clearing lit by embers. At its center stood an anvil, old, cracked, but still warm. Around it the earth glowed faintly, as though the forge beneath had never truly gone cold. Elias dropped to his knees, whispering a prayer that was not quite words. Reached out, brushed the dust from the stone, and found a carving beneath. The same phrase that had passed through every head since Leela time. Still learning, he smiled through tears. Guess I am too. That night, he camped beside the anvil, listening to hum deepen. It spoke not in voices, but in memories, echoes of every soul who'd listened before him. He saw visions of the past, Leela standing by her forge, Isaac tending the flame, Aura by the sea, ash mending machines beneath the stars, each one turning their work into something holy, not through speed or cleverness, but through care. Elias realized then that the hum wasn't tied to place, it was carried in people. The hollow had never been lost, as it was never just a valley, it was a way. In the morning, he began writing. His hands trembled, but the words came sure. He called it the Humkeeper Testament. It wasn't scripture, nor instruction, it was remembrance. A thread stretching from the first forge to every quiet heart that ever chose patience over profit. He wrote till his ink ran dry, then carved the rest with a chisel, letter by letter, into the ebal itself. When he finished, he placed his compass atop it. The needle stilled for the first time in his life. Elias never left that clearing. Travelers later found him sitting beside the anvil, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. The testament lay open across his lap, pages fluttering like the wings of something free. They buried him there, beside the forge, and the wind took his words across the land. Before long, copies began appearing in towns and villages, each one transcribed by hand and carried by those who'd heard the hum for themselves. The testament spread without advertisement, without demand, growing like roots beneath soil, quiet, unshaken. Over centuries, the world began to call this New Age the still Renaissance. Artists painted in silence, letting the world guide their brush. Builders shaped homes that breathed with the wind. Traders met not to haggle but to share. And through it, the hum remained constant, sometimes faint, sometimes thundering, but always there, like the heartbeat of creation itself. Then came the drift years. They always come, don't they? Times when people forget the lessons that saved them before. Started small machines designed to enhance the hum, to simulate patience rather than earn it. Corcoran claimed they could bottle the rhythm of stillness, selling it to those too busy to stop, but imitation never holds the same truth. The hum began to fade in cities again, replaced by synthetic peace that cost more than it gave. People started losing sleep, losing faith, losing feeling. The world grew restless once more, yet even then the real hum didn't die. It just went quiet, waiting for the next soul patient enough to hear. In a small cabin near the northern cliffs, a child named Mara Pike, descendant of Dorian, though she didn't know it, sat alone one stormy night, tinkering with the old radio her grandfather had left behind. The dials were rusted, the speaker torn, but she fiddled anyway, listening through the static. Then through the crackle she heard it. Not music, not voice, just that same low hum, deep and familiar. Her heart skipped. She whispered hello, no answer, only that steady sound. But it was enough. She knew, somehow, she wasn't alone. She spent years studying that frequency, rebuilding the device piece by piece until she found a way to transmit it. What she didn't realize was that she'd rediscovered the natural wavelength of the world itself, the one the hollow had always sung in. When her broadcast went live, thousands heard it across the continents. Farmers paused mid-work, engineers lifted their hands from consoles, and children fell silent, listening. The hum returned, not through power, but through one small girl curiosity and a broken radio. The world remembered again. The hollow, wherever it truly was, shivered back to life. Its forge glowing faint beneath the soil, its Edville humming once more. When the hum returned, it didn't come with fanfare or thunder. It came like the first slow breath after a long storm, a quiet that wasn't empty, but full. Folks around the world couldn't rightly explain what they felt. Some said their sleep deepened, others swore the air grew thicker, softer, like the world had stopped holding itself so tight. Crops flourished in poor soil, music turned sweeter, and time, that restless horse that run wild for centuries, began walking instead of galloping. Mara Pike never sought fame for what she'd done. She was just a curious soul who liked fixing things that sang wrong. When reporters came asking questions, she told them, "I didn't bring it back. It did decide that we were ready to hear it again." They laughed, thinking it then poetic nonsense. But those who'd worked a forge or plowed a field knew what she meant. The hum had its own will. It came only when the world was humble enough to listen. Over time, Mara broadcast, they told it the Pike frequency, became the backbone of a movement. People tuned in not for information, not for entertainment, but for presence. You'd find whole taverns where nobody spoke, just sitting in candlelight as the hum filled the room. Markets stopped shouting prices, trains rolled quiet, even governments, those great machines of talk, learned to pause before acting. A decade later, the leaders of every major province signed what they called the Pact of Quiet Hands. It declared that no law would be passed without a day of stillness before the vote, one day of silence so every decision could breathe. Mara kept to herself through all that, lived in her cabin by the cliffs, tinkering with her equipment, building new transmitters from scrap. She never married, though the stories say she loved deeply, not one person, but the whole of humankind. In that patient way only those who listen truly can. Her walls were lined with sketches and maps, each one charting not territory but tone, places where the hum grew stronger or wavered or changed pitch. She said the earth was speaking in chords and that every region had its own verse. The world ain't one song, she wrote once in her journal, it a choir, and would keep forgetting to take turns singing. Scholars later called her work acoustic cartography. Pilgrims just called it following the song. They'd travel barefoot through mountains, deserts, and rainforests listening for the hum harmony. Some claimed they could heal sick land by humming back to it. And maybe they viewed their power in remembering villages that had dried to dust came back green. Rivers long polluted began to clear. Even the stars looked brighter. It was as though the earth itself was breathing easy again. But peace is never a permanent thing, is it? Rhythm that needs tending and ache fire. There came a new generation who didn't grow up remembering the silence before the hum. They took it for granted, thinking it then another technology, Some built machines to replicate it, others tried bottling it for profit. Devices that claimed to deliver synthetic stillness, folks bought them too, not knowing the difference at first. But within months, the air changed again. The true hum dimmed, replaced by a tinny imitation that left people restless in a way they couldn't name. Fields turned brittle, conversations grew shorter, tempers quicker. It was happening all over. Quiet tamed rot. Mara saw she act you did. She warned anyone who'd listen, but most were too distracted by convenience to care. So she did what the old keepers always did when the world got noisy. She went back to the source, packed her radio, her compass, and a notebook, and set off across the plains alone. She followed the fainted vibrations she could feel, sometimes on her knees with her ear to the ground. For months she wandered, growing thinner but stronger in spirit, till one night under a violet sky she reached a valley ringed with fireflies. The hum there was so deep it made her bones ache. She knelt, digging through the soil until her fingers struck metal. It was at Advil, the same one Elias Finch had written upon centuries before. The inscription was still there, though half buried and worn smooth. Still learning. She laughed through tears, whispering, "So am I." Then they set up her radio beside it, tuned to the old frequency, and began humming along. Not broadcasting, not recording, just humming. Slowly, the forge beneath the valley warmed again, the ground trembling soft at a heartbeat. She didn't speak another word that night. Some say she vanished there, her body turned to light. Others say she became the new keeper, part of the hum itself. What's certain is this: the next morning, the world woke to a sound deeper and clearer than then before. The true hum was back. Not from towers or transmitters, but from the ground beneath every step. Machines stilled. The synthetic signals failed. For the first time in generations, there was nothing but silence and that slow, sacred vibration that made the heart remember how to rest. From then on, no one sought to capture it again. Instead, people built open sanctuaries, round stone circles called echo grounds, where folks could sit and listen together. No sermons, no rituals, just quiet communion with the sound that had carried humanity from hammer to halo. Farmers would hum to their soil before planting. Parents would teach their children not to speak for the first hour of dawn. Lovers would sit beneath storms saying nothing and feel the rain keeping time with their breath. It wasn't faith, it wasn't science, it was just life, remembered proper. And years rolled into century. Stories of Lila, Isaac, Aura, Ash, Elias, Dorian, and Mara merged into a sealed legend told by campfires and rainy porches the world over. They called it the Song of the Hum. Each retelling added a verse, each voice changed the melody, but the meaning stayed the same. Don't chase the word noise, child. Sit still. The gold you're looking for already humming in your hands, so maybe tonight under your roof with rain tapping steady on the window and the fire sighing low, if you close your eyes and listen. Not to the wind, not to the world, but to that soft old sound under your ribs. You might just hear it too. The hum, patient and true, waiting for one more listener. And if you do, don't speak. Just smile and let it know you're still here, because it's been listening all along. The hum became the measure of a man's wealth, though not in coin or gold, but in quiet. You could tell how rich a soul was by how slow they moved, how soft they spoke, how steady their eyes stayed when the world began to spin too fast. There weren't banks no more, not the kind that locked away treasure behind steel. The new ones folks piled to trust halls stored lessons, stories, and moments of stillness. You could walk in and listen to the hum that had passed through the walls, carrying the memory of every whisperer shared there, and if you left lighter than you came, that was profit enough. They say in those days trade was done by rhythm, no contracts, no fine print, just the hum between two people that they agreed. You could hear honesty plain Ed daylight. The Leo couldn't stand it, the hum went sour around deceit, so they either learned truth or left. It wasn't law that kept order then, it was resonance. A world tuned to harmony doesn't need much else. Travelers would ride from town to town, spreading tales of the old keepers. Some came as scholars seeking the science of the sound, others were wanderers, more spirit than flesh, drifting wherever the hum led, but among them was one who stood out, an old Gil cowboy named Jeb Carroll. Nobody knew where he came from, and he never said much about it. Rode a horse with no brand, carried a satchel full of notebooks, and a harmonica he never played unless the sky was about to rain. When Jeb came to a town, folks knew he was not there for trade or shelter. He came to listen. He'd sit by their wells or at the foot of their hills, leaning against a post with his hat low, and stay till the hum settled right again. Sometimes it took hours, sometimes days. But when he finally rose and nodded, people would swear the air itself had grown warmer. Crops perked up, arguments died out, even the dogs quit barking. Then he'd leave. Quiet day he came. They started calling him the Resident Rider. Word spread that he was one of Mara Pike's last apprentices, though he never confirmed it. What he did say to those few who earned his trust was that the hum had changed again. Not gone, but shifted, growing deeper. World breathing slower, he'd mumble over a campfire, we're heading towards something. Not an end, not exactly, more like a long exhale. One autumn, while reading across a red plain near the old hollow rumored edge, Jeb came across a settlement in silence. Not peaceful silence, but hollow, frightened quiet. The people there said their hum had stopped 3 nights prior. Machines wouldn't start, the ground had gone cold, and dreams came heavy with dread. Some claimed they'd heard whispers underground, like a forge crying out in pain. Jeb didn't waste words. He built a fire in the town square, set his harmonica beside it, and sat down. Don't talk, he told him. Just breathe with it. All night he hummed, slow, deep. Each note fell like rain on stone. By dawn the wind began to stir again, soft and warm. The townsfolk wept. They said they could feel the hum pulse return under their boots. When they looked to thank him, he was already gone, riding west. They found only his harmonica left behind, resting atop the ashes of the fire. On it, scratched faint but certain, were 2 words, keep listening. For years after, people claimed to see Jeb's shadow on distant ridges, sometimes a figure on horseback humming to the clouds, sometimes little tune carrying through the canyons before a storm. Nobody really caught it, and maybe that's how it was meant to be. The hum didn't belong to any one person, it just borrowed voices when it needed them. Jeb was another, same made Lila, Isaac, Ora, Ash, Elias, Dorian, and Mara before him. A vessel the world used to remind itself what patience sounded like. And maybe the hum knew the world needed reminding again. For though the age of stillness had lasted centuries, the weight of ease began to creep back. Machines that once hummed in harmony started demanding more energy. Folks got clever again, too clever. They found ways to compress the hum, odds it to power grand new engines, build ships that sailed the air, tunnels that cut through earth. At first it seemed fine. The hum was infinite, they said. But it wasn't. It was generous, not endless. And every time they took without listening, it dimmed just a little more. That when the quakes began. Small, gentle ones at first, like the earth sighing. But soon, mountains rumbled and rivers shifted course. The trussed halls trembled. People panicked. They turned their radios back to the Pike frequency, hoping to hear that calm, steady tone. But all they got was static. That when they remembered the old stories of the anvil, of the hollow, of the keepers who listened when the world hurt. So they ved, thousands of them in open fields and valleys, humming together in unison, and though the tremors didn't stop right away, something miraculous happened. The land answered. The shaking slowed, the wind eased, the hum, faint and battered though it was, began to find its rhythm again. It was then folks realized the truth that every keeper before had known, but none could quite put to words. The hum wasn't just the world speaking, it was the conversation between man and earth. It lived in balance. When one side stopped listening, the other grew quiet too. But when they listened together, the song went on. So from that day, the world made a vow never again to take from the hum without giving back. Every town built an echo ground. Every child learned the old verses, and every traveler carried with them a piece of stillness, passing it along like fire from one hand to another.
Centuries would roll by and the Resident Rider would fade into myth, but sometimes when thunder rolled low and long, folks would pause and smile, swearing they could hear a faint harmonica ride in the wind playing slow, true, and timeless. And maybe it was Jeb humming still, keeping the world in tune. They said that long after Jeb last sight, and a strange calm swept across the plains, not the tide born from peace, but from weight, like the land itself was waiting for someone to finish a thought left hanging in the air. Storms rolled in slower, rivers moved thicker, even the wind lost its hurry. It was as if the hum was drawing a deep, patient breath before singing again. Out beyond the new settlements, where machines hummed low and the stars hadn't been swallowed by the glow of cities, there lived a woman named Elsie Branton. She wasn't a keeper by title, nor a scholar by training, just a ranch hand who'd grown tired of chasing wages that slipped through her fingers like dust.
Her daddy used to say the world got too noisy for honest living when silence cost money. He told her once truth would start selling itself cheap. She didn't understand it then. But years later, alone on a patch of dry land and debt up to her neck, she finally did. One night, while mending a busted fence, she heard it. Faint, low, barely there, the hum drifting through the soil. It stopped her cold. She dropped her hammer, knelt, and pressed her ear to the ground. For a long time, she just listened. Then, slow and uncertain, she began humming back. The note quivered, cracked, but the ground answered. The next morning, her cattle had wandered home from the far ridge. The dry troughs were full from a spring she didn't even know existed. It was like the land had been waiting for her to remember how to speak to it. Word got her out fast. Folks started visiting her ranch asking to hear the hum, but Elsie always said the same thing. Ain't mine to share. You got to earn its trust yourself. She'd lead them out past the barn, have them sit quiet under the sky and wait. Most could stand they'd fidget, cough, check their watches, but the ones who stayed long enough would hear it too. Sometimes they'd cry. Sometimes they'd laugh like children remembering a secret. Either way, their left changed. Soon, people began calling her the Still Hand. She didn't much care for the title, but she couldn't stop what it started. Pilgrims came from all over, not to pray, but to listen. They built small circles of stone around her land, humming together till the ground beneath their boots trembled with warmth. The government tried taxing it once, claiming the gatherings were disruptive. The attempt failed. Every time the agents came, their machines would short out, their pens leak, their voices trail off mid-sentence. The hum didn't pay kindly to interruption. By the 5th year, Elsie Ranch had turned into a vast field of quiet stretching miles across the prairie. People came not for spectacle, but for reset. Merchants who'd lost their greed, widows who'd lost their sleep, invent kin who'd lost their wonder, they all found it again, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, breathing in time with the world. The hum grew strong there, richer than anywhere else. Some said it was because Jeb harmonica had been buried somewhere under those hills. Others swore the old hollow itself lay beneath. Whatever the reason, the land glowed faintly at dusk, like the horizon itself was singing. Then, one autumn evening, a thunder walked the far rim of the sky. Elsie felt something change. The hum shifted key. It grew deeper, more mournful. The ground shook once, gentle but sure, and in that moment she knew what it meant. The earth wasn't raking, it was calling. She packed a small sachet, left her homestead behind, and followed the vibration north into the canyon. Her followers begged her to stay, but she only smiled. Can't hold on to the hum, she said. It don't live where we want it to. It lives what it needed. No one saw her again after that. But months later, miners working deep beneath the cliffs found carvings etched into stone walls. Lines of words written in a strong, careful hand. Don't fix what quiet. Don't fear what listens. Below that, the rock pulsed faintly, humming the same steady tone that had carried through generations. The miners sealed the tunnel, leaving it untouched.
They said it didn't feel right to take from that place. And from that day on, the hum beneath the world grew gentler like a beast that had finally found rest. Years turned to decades. The field of quiet became a living legend. The descendants of those who'd once lived there turned it into a great open school. No walls, no desks, just wind and silence. They paid it the Academy of Stillness. Children were taught not how to speak first, but how to listen. They learned history through hum, feeling the pulse of what came before instead of reading about it. For a time it worked. The world stayed kind, balanced, a little slower than before, but maybe that was its strength. Then came the iron colonies. New settlers from beyond the sea folk who'd lost their own hum ages old arrived with ships powered by thunder and greed dressed as progress. They heard about the still hand field and the quiet wealth of the land. But when they tried to harness the hum, they found it slippery, uncooperative. They built great engines meant to bottle its resonance, but each one failed catastrophic.
The ground would swallow them whole, or the machines would simply stop. No smoke, no flame, just silence. The engineers called it the dead air phenomenon, but the people of the field had another name for it. They called it the hum refusal. The earth was drawing boundaries again, reminding mankind that not aught riches could be mined or measured. The colonists didn't listen. They kept building, kept drilling, and the hum dimmed almost to nothing. It was Elsie, great-granddaughter, a quiet girl named Thora, who turned it around. She found one of Jeb's old notebooks buried in the dust of her ancestor ranch. Inside were only 3 words scrawled near the end. Listen before acting. It became her creed. She dismantled the colony machines, one by one, replacing each with gardens, forges, and wind chimes. People thought her mad till the hum returned louder than ever. Rain fell again, crops grew thick, and the world once more remembered what patience could buy. By then, stories of the still hand and the resonant rider had become part of a larger myth, a single, long song of balance. Nobody remembered names proper anymore, but everyone remembered the lesson. If you sit long enough by the fire, you'll hear it too. It not did the earth breathing. It all of us learning the same truth over and over again. The world don't need to be conquered, it just needs to be heard. By the time Thora Garden bloomed into its second spring, the hum had threaded itself through every living thing again. You could hear it in the windmill's slow spin, in the way dew clung to blades of grass, even in the soft rhythm of a man's heart after a long day work. It wasn't just background anymore. It was a kind of guide, a promise that no matter how far humanity wandered, there'd always be a tune leading them home. Thora never called herself a keeper, though she lived like one. Her house was built of stone and glass, right where the prairie met the foothills, so the dawn could spill through and the hum could roll clean across her floorboards. She kept no clocks, no calendars. Her life moved by sound alone, the changing tempo of the soil, the rise and fall of river tone. When storms brewed, she'd hum them low and even, and they'd ease just enough to water the fields without tearing them apart. The neighbors thought that was witchcraft at first, but soon they learned. What she was doing wasn't commanding nature, it was cooperating with it. The children who came to her school didn't learn to read or write. They learned to resonate. Every lesson began in silence, followed by a single tone struck from a tuning rod forged of old hollow iron. The tone would hum through the floor and into their bones. Then Thora would spook slow, deliberate, never louder than the wind out. "Hear it?" she'd ask, that the world remembering itself. "Now your turn." And one by one they'd hum back until the room vibrated with life. Generation passed and those children grew into builders, farmers, and thinkers who worked by rhythm instead of rush. They called their way of life measured living. Cities were designed to sing, every wall, window, and bridge built to carry sound instead of drown it. At dusk, entire neighborhoods would fall silent for one shared minute, listening to how the hum bounced between their homes, became their prayer and their prophet in one. The markets ran smoother, the crops grew richer, and families stopped shouting over supper. The hum had become more than history. It was currency, but not the kind you could hoard. The only way to keep it was to give it. Still, no ebb of peace lasts forever. The world, as the old storytellers like to remind folks, is a wheel turning slow but certain. Eventually, someone always tries to measure the immeasurable. It started with a man named Alden Veers, a bright but prideful inventor from one of the coastal cities. He believed the hum was not divine or mystical. It was mechanical, born from pressure and pulse beneath the crust. He built a device he called the listener engine, designed to capture the resonance of the earth and amplify it for energy. The first time he fired it up, lights flared across the city like sunrise. People cheered. Free power, they said. Endless and pure. For a while, it worked, but as the months passed, folks began complaining of headaches, sleepless nights, and dreams full of strange, low noises. The hum didn't vanish. It fractured. The tones grew sharp, metallic. Crops stopped responding, and the animals moved inland, away from the sea. It took a year before Alden realized what he'd done. The listener engine hadn't heard the hum, it had interrupted it. He tried to shut it down, but the mechanism had fused to the ground, humming with its own false echo. And once again, the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was absence. Thora descendants known called the line of still hands journeyed to the coast to help. They brought with them the old harmonicas, the maps of resonance, the last surviving copy of Mara Pike frequencies. When they arrived, they didn't scold or fight. They simply listened. The youngest of them, a boy no older than 12, stepped forward and said, "The hum ain't gone, it just hurt." He placed his palms on the metal hull of the engine and began to hum, soft and trembling. The sound grew, spreading through the streets, until even the machines themselves began to vibrate in tune. Alden fell to his knees, weeping. He joined in, his voice rough with regret, and in that harmony of guilt and forgiveness, of noise and stillness, the false tone finally broke. The engine cracked down the middle, and from its heart poured not smoke but warmth. The hum returned, deeper than thin. The ocean itself was sighing in relief.
That day became known name as the Mending. And though Alden Veers vanished soon after, his story was passed down as a cautionary hymn. Don't build louder, build truer. The world changed again after that. They stopped chasing bigger machines, turned instead to resonant crafting tools and structures designed to harmonize with the hum instead of compete with it. Entire cities floated on sound anchored by deep, tunnel cores that pulsed in rhythm with the planet. No fuel, no smoke, no rush, just quiet motion guided by care. Some said humanity had finally learned its lesson. Others, the wise old ones who'd seen too many cycles, just smiled and said, for now. And maybe that's how it was meant to be. The hum never promised permanence, it only promised presence. Every age would rise and fall, but as long as there was one soul left willing to sit by the fire and listen, really listen, the song would keep going. They say the last still hand lived to see the dawn of the fifth cycle. When the stars began to sing again, the hum had reached beyond the earth, traveling through the void, teaching even the cold dark to carry its warmth. On her final night, the old woman sat beneath an endless sky, the air thick with rain and memory. She closed her eyes, placed her hand on the ground and whispered,
"We're still learning, old friend."
And somewhere deep below, a forge that had burned since the first hammer strike answered back, steady, patient, eternal. When the sun rose the next morning, folks said the air felt lighter. They didn't find her body, owning her shawl folded neatly by the hearth. But if you walked far enough from town and waited long enough between breaths, you could still hear her humming in the wind. Not a ghost, not a god, just another verse in the oldest song therein was. And if you would hear it yourself, whether through rain or fire or the lonely hush of dawn, don't rush to speak, don't try to explain, just listen. That's all it asked of us. Years drifted like dust across a sunbeam after that great mending, and the world settled once more into its slow rhythm. Cities shimmered with harmony, their walls tuned to the same deep pulse that had once guided Jeb Caro and the Still Hand. Folks spoke softer now, walked slower, built only what they could hum along to. But even in peace, there'd always a whisper of forgetting. The young ones, born into ease, began to treat the hum not that a partner, but the background noise, something pretty, something that'd always be there, whether they tended to it or not. That was when the drifters started coming down from the northern rim. They were wanderers, dressed in glass thread coats that shimmered like mirages, called themselves echoers, said they could shape the hum, bend it to build new wonders faster than man or nature ever could. Their leader was a tall woman named Cale Moran, with eyes like wet iron and a voice that could make stone quiver. Folks said she was a descendant of the old resonant rider himself, though whether by blood or by myth, no one rightly knew. Cale came preaching what she called the ascending tone. She claimed the hum had limits only because mankind kept listening instead of laden. The world hums, she told the crowds, because it waiting for someone to sing back strong enough. And for a while, she caught the wind of the people. They built grand towers that rose to frozen songs, each beam vibrating with artificial harmony. They said the hum had never sounded clearer, but to those who'd lived through the mending, that new song felt hollow, too perfect, too forced, like a hymn sung by a choir that forgot what the words meant. Old folk began leaving the cities, setting up small camps in the wild again, trying to find the hum which still breathed free. One such camp sat at the edge of the thundering plains where an old man named Harran Tull kept watch over a lonely forge. He'd been a child when the listener engine broke, and he remembered the silence that followed. So he'd made it his life work to guard the true sound of the world from being drowned out again. He taught those who came by to hum with their hands, not their tongues, to let the rhythm guide their work instead of their ambition. The folks who stayed with him became known as the Anvils of Stillness. Harran had a student once, a quiet girl named Mayrin, who'd been raised in one of Cale's cities. She'd never known the real hum, only the perfect tones broadcast through walls and wires. The first time she stood on the plains and heard the earth's natural voice, it shook her clean through. She cried, not from fear, but from remembering what honesty felt there. It ain't beautiful, Harran told her, it's true. Beauty comes later. If you've got patience, for years they work side by side, reforging tools, mending plows, teaching travelers who pass by how to hear Ed. But every year, the hum grew a little thinner. The ascending tone was spreading, drowning out the wild song with precision and power. Harran grew frail, and before he passed, he gave Mayrin his last piece of advice. When the hum been stolen, he said, "Don't fight for it and remind it." She didn't understand then, but she did later. When Cale Moran announced the completion of her final project, the Resonant Spire, a tower said to capture the hum of the entire world and project it back stronger, Mayrin left the forge and rode for the city. The spire rose higher than clouds, humming so loud the ground itself trembled. Cale stood before her followers and declared, "No more listening. From this day forth, the world follows our tone." And with that, she struck a tuning fork the size of a church bell. The sound that followed was like thunder raking in reverse, pulling instead of pushing. Birds fell from the air.
The rivers froze midstream. Even the stars seemed to flicker. Mayrin dropped to her knees. She could feel the hum underneath, trapped and struggling. So she did the only thing she knew. She closed her eyes and began to hum. Not to overpower, but to comfort. A seal, low note, steady, a heartbeat. The spire cracked once, then twice. Cale turned, eyes wide with fury. "You can't stop it," she shouted. "You're too small." But Mayrin didn't stop. She kept humming through the quake, through the blinding light, through the chaos. One by one, people joined her. Farmers, engineers, wanderers, even of Cale owned. Their voices wove together, and for the first time in a long time, the world heard itself in harmony. The spire groaned like a dying beast, then split from top to bottom. When the dust cleared, there was silence, pure and alive. Cale was gone, vanished, like Jeb or Elsie or Thora before her. Since she was taken by the hum itself, punished or forgiven, nobody could tell. Myron rebuilt not a tower but a circle. Just open air and stone, no wires, no devices. Folks lived there again, humming under the same sky that had watched over the keepers of every age. They did the return. And so the cycle went on, building, forgetting, remembering. Not as men were fools, but as that what living is. Each generation learning the same lesson in a different key. Each soul taking its turn to listen before the silence takes it back. The hum don't fade. It just waits. Always has. Always will. And if you close your eyes right now, wherever you are, whether it's the quiet of your room or the low roll of thunder beyond your porch, you'll hear it too. The hum beneath the hum. The breath between thoughts. The oldest promise of all. The world still remembers you even when you forget it. Just hum back. They say after the return, the air across the plains never quite sounded the same again. It was softer, richer, like the hum had learned from all those years of struggle. No longer it a rhythm under the soil. It had become something woven into people themselves. You could hear it in their footfalls, in the pauses between their words, in the quiet sighs they let out after a hard day work. The world had slowed down once more, but this time it wasn't because of exhaustion or defeat. It was because folks had finally understood there was no race worth running faster than your own breath. Mayrin grew old watching the new balance take shape. She never called herself a leader, though people treated her like one. When asked what she'd done to save the hum, she always laughed and said, "Didn't save it, just remembered it out loud." Her circle became a place of gathering for traders, thinkers, and wanderers alike. There were no sermons there, no walls, no creeds, just stories and silence shared under the open sky. And when the wind passed through that circle, it carried a faint chord that sounded of forgiveness. One autumn night, a caravan rolled in from the eastern dunes. Among them was a young scribe named Eno Vale, carrying a book thicker than a saddlebag and older than his own grandfather. He said it was a collection of fragments, journals, sketches, and hymns from every age touched by the hum. It called it the Ledger of Resonance. Mayrin welcomed him, fed him by the fire, and asked him to read. As he did, the people there, their shadows dancing across the stone. The ledger spoke of Jeb Forge, of Elsie Field, of Thora Quiet, and of Alden Shame. It told of Cale rise and fall, of storms that sang and rivers that mourned. But what struck Mayrin most was the ending, because there wasn't one. The last page was left blank, save for a single light at the bottom. Every silence deserves its next sound. She closed the book and handed it back, whispering, "Then let make sure it a good one." The years rolled on. The hum changed with the people. It always had. New trades were born, not of steel or fire, but of tone. Resonant smiths shaped materials through vibration instead of heat. Tone wrights crafted melodies that repaired wood and healed cracked stone. Even currency had changed, measured in harmonics, not numbers. They called it pulse trade. You could pay for a loaf of bread with the hum of the right pitch, so long as your acre felt it true. It wasn't about value anymore. It was about trust, about connection. Civilization had turned its economy back into empathy. But out beyond the cities, beyond even the memory of cities, there were places where the hum had never returned. Silent valleys, dead rivers. Folks whispered of them like ghosts. The hollow lands, they said the earth there had forgotten how to sing. And yet, once every few decades, someone would wander off into those wastes, claiming to hear faint traces like echoes begging to be remembered. Mayrin's great-grandson, a wanderer named Cale Tull, was one such soul. Cale didn't go for fame or fortune. He went because he couldn't stand the idea of silent suffering alone. He carried with him a steel instrument,
The old beat-up harmonica said to have belonged to Jeb himself, passed down through the still-hand line like a promise. He rode into the hollow lands under a blood-red dusk and vanished for 3 years. When he returned, his beard was white, his hands cracked, but his eyes burned like dawn through fog.
They said he'd found the hum be weak, wounded, but breathing, and though no one believed him, he never raised his voice to prove it. He just played. At first it was barely sound, just a soft waver of breath through metal reeds. But then, slowly, the ground began to tremble. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, water began to flow. Those who were there swore they saw the horizon shimmer, like heat waves off sand, only cooler, bluer. The hollow lands were waking up. When Cale finished, he smiled, set the harmonica down on a stone, and said, "Guess even silence just needed company." Then he closed his eyes and never opened them again. They buried him where we played, under an arch of stone that hummed faintly at sunset. Travelers began leaving offerings there, little trinkets, bits of wire, shards of glass that caught the light. It became known as the grave that sings. Every few years, the hum would rise from it stronger than before, like the land remembering a friend name after too long a pause. Generation later, a young man from the coastal academies, one of those bright-eyed thinkers too curious for his own good, traveled to the gauge. They study in the science of resonance, hoping to quantify what his ancestors say is divine. He brought with him Rikudan rods, sound prisms, instruments that could measure vibrations down to the atom. For weeks he studied charting the frequencies of the hum, the tremors of the soil. Then one night in the middle of a storm he heard a sound that none of his devices could detect. A low note, deep at time. It shook the marrow in his bones. He realized then that he hadn't discovered anything new. He'd simply arrived at the same truth the old cowboys, the smiths, and the still hands had found before him. The hum wasn't something you studied, it was something that studied you. He shut off his machines, packed his tools, and sat there to dawn, humming back. When he returned home, he didn't publish his findings. Instead, he wrote a single line at the end of his journal: "The song keeps singing, and I keep listening." That journal joined the ledger of resonance sitting on the say shelf in a quiet hall of the field of quiet still open to the wind.
Folks come from far-off lands to read deep, but most don't. They sit by the door, close their eyes, and hum. Because after and the ages, all the rise and fall, all the noise and silence, the truth remains the same. The world don't remember your words, it remembers your tone. And in long end, they're a tone worth listening to. The hum will never die. Time rolled onward like an old wheel creaking through soft dirt. And though the hum had found its voice again, folks never stopped listening for what came next. The field of quiet became something of a pilgrimage site for anyone who'd lost their way, be it in trade, faith, or love. The path there wasn't rocked by signs or roads, only by instinct. If your heart was restless enough, it would pull you there, sure, a compass to true north. On most nights, you could find a small fire burning in the center of that field, but wanderers dared under skies so wide they could swallow thought whole. They didn't talk Dutch, or they didn't need to. The hum carried their stories for them.
You'd hear in the crackle of firewood, the rustle of coats, the way the rain slowed when it reached their circle. It was said that even the stars seemed to flicker a little softer above that place, if the whole universe leaned in to listen. Among those who came was a woman named Rilla, a trader who'd once made her fortune selling imitation harmonics, cheap devices that mimicked the sound of true resonance but lacked its soul. She'd built her empire fast and clever, flooding the cities with her wares until every home buzzed with artificial hum. But over time, the real tone beneath it began to fade. Crops soured, tempers rose, and her fortune turned to ash in her hands. One night, haunted by the false echoes of her own creation, she packed what little she had left and set out across the plains, while in whisper that all who wandered far enough could still hear. When she reached the field of quiet, she found not judgment, but welcome. An old man by the fire nodded to her, sledding over his cup of bitter-root tea. "Ain't no reckoning out tea," he said. Just remembering Rilla sat beside him in silence. When the night wind came, she thought she could hear faint notes woven into a tone she'd tried to sell but never truly felt. For the first time in years, she didn't try to fix it, shape it, or sell it. She just listened. But when dawn broke, she whispered a single word to the wind: "Sorry." They say the hum swelled a little that morning. Not loud, just deep, like the earth itself had nodded back. Rilla stayed, didn't return to the cities, didn't rebuild her trade. Instead, she became a tone keeper. Quiet kind of monk whose job wasn't to spread the hum, but to tend it. She taught travelers the art of still listening, how to find silence long enough for the hum to find them. In time, people stopped thinking of the field of quiet as a holy place and started thinking of it as a healing one. There was a difference, subtle but vital. Holiness separated, healing rejoined. Decades passed and the world changed again. Not just could a mandate for what the seat is. Despot goats and cross and long. At ours, and old pickle that water, and not loud, just deep, like the earth itself had nodded back. Rilla stayed, didn't return to the cities, didn't rebuild her trade. Instead, she became a tone keeper, a quiet kind of monk whose job wasn't to spread the hum, but to tend it. She taught travelers the art of still listening, how to find silence long enough for the hum to find them. In time, people stopped thinking of the field of quiet at a holy place and started thinking of it at a healing one. There was a difference, subtle but vital. Holiness separated, healing rejoined. Decades passed and the world changed again.
Straight route, songs with gentle energy. Songs were used to till the soil, to guide ships, to comfort the weary. But the lesson of Rilla Fall, of selling what should only be shared, stuck deep in the bone of humankind.
No one tried to harness the tone again. Not for power, not for greed. The hum was free, and in its freedom it grew wiser. Then one winter, when the snow came whispering down the canyons like soft applause, a boy named Kellen found an old instrument buried beneath the roots of a frozen willow. It was a harmonica rusted, cracked, its reeds half-eaten by time. Yet when he lifted it to his lips and blew, it sang. Not clear, but honest. The sound carried through the valley like a memory being remembered too late. Kellen didn't know who it had belonged to, though the elders guessed it might have been Kel Tull, the same one said to wake the hollow lands. The boy started playing wherever he went. Market squares, crossroads, barns at dusk. His tunes were simple, sometimes half forgotten. But every note carried warmth that cut through the coldest air.
History. Yeah, I get around the seed tree with the Fort Mazamon Mamon board, sure. Before long, they formed what folks called the Royaman Choir. Dozens of voices drifting across the land, singing to heal the quiet corners that time had abandoned. No one led the choir, no one wrote their songs down. The hum itself seemed to write through them, shape and melody from moment. In one town, they sang by a dried-up well, and water began to rise again. In another, they sang over a fallen bridge, and the timbers tightened, holding once more. But perhaps the most remarkable thing they did was in a small village perched above the sea. The cliffs had been eroding for generations. The choir sang 3 nights straight, their voices low and sorrowful. When morning came, the cliffs stood firm, and every villager swore the ocean had learned to hum with the land instead of against it. By then, Kellen had grown into a man, though he never stopped carrying that old harmonica, guys.
One night, the choir camped near the edge of the desert. He asked them to quiet down. We've sung a lot of songs for the world, he said. But maybe tonight, we will listen to what it's singing for us. They sat by the fire. No sound but the wind moving over sand. And sure enough, faint tan breath, the dunes began to murmur, a low melody, older than any throat could manage. The choir didn't dare join in. They'd listened, tears rolling down their faces, for in that moment, they realized what every soul since Jeb Carroll had been trying to learn. You don't keep the hum alive by singing louder. You keep it alive by leaving space for it to breathe. When Kellen passed years later, the choir didn't bury him. They scattered his ashes across the desert where the dunes could carry his tone forever. They left the harmonica on a high ridge, and to this day, when the wind blows just right, it plays a single perfect note. Some say that Kellen's still humming along. Others say it the world thanking him for remembering to listen. Either way, it music. And maybe that all it needed to be. And so the ages drifted the way dust dances through a sunbeam for landing quiet on an old tale. The Royaman choir faded into legend, though sometimes in far-off valleys or deep canyons, folks swore they still heard their soft patient like a lullaby meant for the earth itself. The hum had become less of a sound and more of a memory. It wasn't something you could record, capture, or trade anymore. It was something you carried, like breath, like forgiveness. There was a say that took root around that time, simple words carved into stone near the edge of the old Harmon crossroads. To live rich is to listen long. Wasn't about gold, not anymore. Wealth had paid its meaning. In this age, richness was measured in patience, in the quality of your silence, in how long you could let another soul speak before needing to fill the air. And though the hum no longer roared like it once did, it settled deep inside the world bones, humming slow through roots and rivers, guiding mankind in ways subtle and kind. Now among those living in this quieter time was a man named Ephron Dow. He wasn't a builder or a singer, nor was he a scholar or prophet. He was a banker of sorts, though in a world which sound was currency, that title meant something different. He managed a resonant vault, a place where folks could store the tones that meant the most to them. Every tone was unique, recorded not through machine or crystal, but through memory and witness. When someone played their life hum, say the note of their first child, laughter, or the timbre of their mother goodnight hum, it would be sealed into the vault with reverence, not for ownership, but preservation. Ephron was good at his job, too good maybe, could recall nearly every tone stored within his vault, humming them back perfect when asked. But years went on, he started noticing something strange. Some tones was disappearing. There he is, not stolen, just fadeen. When he tried to recall them, there was nothing but a hollow where the sound had once lived. He checked his ledgers, his logs, even his own mind, but there was no sign of corruption or deceit, just silence spreading slow through the archive, like a shadow. So one evening, as the rains whispered against the vault's silver roof, Ephron did something he'd never done before. He closed up early, locked the door, and started humming every tone he could remember. The air shimmered with sound laughter, tears, lullabies, promises. He played till his throat ached, trying to call back the ones that were lost. But no matter how he tried, the missing tones stayed gone. He sat in that emptiness for hours, listening to his own breath, until a soft voice behind him said, "Maybe they just moved on." It was an old woman, small as a shadow, dressed in a traveling cloak worn thin by years. She smiled when he turned, eyes kind but sharp, being the edge of a tuning fork. "You think the hum stays put?" she said.
Don't belong to the past. It migrates.
Organics.
She tapped her chest to whoever needs it next. Didn't quite believe her, not then. But later that night, when the wind passed through the cracks of the vault, he heard faint echoes of the lost tones woven together, carried outward far beyond his walls. That when he realized the hum was still traveling, it didn't vanish, it returned to circulation. The next morning, Ephron did something no banker before him had done. He unlocked the vault forever. If the hum wants to move, he said, let it wander. Folks saw him a fool. They said he'd let priceless sounds slip into the wind, never to be recovered. But years later, when his town was struck by famine and grief, the fields themselves began to sing. The rain returned, the crops grew, and the air filled with the voices of those same tones that had once been stored behind his door. Turns out, he hadn't lost them at that. He just trusted them enough to roam free. When Ephron passed, they buried him beneath a willow that hummed in the wind like a choir in prayer. On his gravestone, they carved the words he'd spoken the day he opened the vault. What you keep dies quiet. What you give breathes forever. Centuries later, that phrase became the backbone of a new way of life. It was called the open ledger, a philosophy that saw every trade, every deal, every act of kindness as part of the same song. People stopped hoarding money, power, even wisdom. They started flowing their gifts outward like the hum itself. And though greed still flickered in the corners, it could never take hold long. Not when the air itself hummed reminders of generosity past. There were still markets and trade, sure, but they were gentle now. Every contract began with a pause, each party taking a moment to breathe and listen. They called it the quiet clause. Some said it made deals fairer. Others said it was just good manners. But everyone agreed it made the world feel a little more human. And though most had forgotten, Ephron Dalnina's lesson lingered that true wealth was not what you death, but what you released, that the hum itself thrived not by staying in one place, but by moving through hearts, changing shape, changing lives. So if you will find yourself wandering near the old plains on a still night and you hear a faint tone drifting through the grass, don't hush it, don't chase it, just listen. It might be an echo of a laugh long gone, or the whisper of a song once sung in love. Maybe at Ephron Vault still open, spilling blessings into the dark. And if you're lucky enough to catch that sound in your chest, even for a heartbeat hum back, the world's been waiting for you. By the time the open ledger philosophy had spread across the continents, the world was quieter. Not from loss, but from peace. Cities no longer roared with the chaos of progress. They hummed with rhythm instead, alive with a kind of patient pulse. The lights glowed softer, commerce moved slower, and people found themselves lingering longer at market stalls, in doorways beside streams. They'd learned that hurry was a kind of hunger that never truly fed the soul, and so they stopped rushing. The hum had taught them that all things worth having came in their own time, like rain or forgiveness or understanding. But even in a world so healed, not every man or woman could find peace right away. There was one in particular, a drifter by the name of Bram Calvin, who couldn't seem to sit still. He was a craftsman once, a builder of bridges and roads back when the world still prized speed and structure. But when the hum returned, his bridges grew unnecessary. Folks no longer needed to span great divides, for they'd learned to meet in the middle. His roads crumbled from disuse, and the dust swallowed up the tracks of his work. So he wandered, half looking for a purpose, half running from the emptiness of having lost one. He traveled for years, living off wild fruit and the kindness of strangers, until one evening he came upon a valley bathed in moonlight. There were no cities there, no farms, no hum of machines, just a single river winding through tall grass that shimmered silver in the night. Bram sat at camp by that river, his fire flickering against the stillness. For the first time in years, he felt something stirring deep in his bones, like the world itself was calling him to listen. He didn't know it then, but this valley had a story. Long gone, before the hum had returned, it had been the site of one of the last great markets, a place of greed and noise so loud that even the earth had grown tired. They said the hum had fled from that valley, refusing to sing when men shouted over one another. What was left behind was a silence that choked the air, heavy and mournful. Generation passed and the valley remained empty, forgotten by maps and memory alike. Yet as Bram sat there watching the fire crackle, he felt something in that silence. It was not absence, it was potential, the kind of quiet that had a question instead of demanding an answer. So he did what came natural. He built, not roads this time, nor bridges. He led stones from the river and laid them in a circle. Each night he'd add another ring, humming softly as he worked. Didn't know why he did only that it felt right, like his hands were remembering something older than thought. Weeks turned to months. The circle grew wide, tall enough to catch the wind and deep enough to trap echoes. By the time it reached his shoulders, it had begun to hum on its own. A faint tone at first, a breath caught between two heartbeats, then stronger, richer. The valley responded, the grass shivering with resonance. And when the first rain came, the drops hitting the stones sang in chorus. Bram just stood there, eyes wet, whispering, "What I'll be damned." Word of the singing valley spread, carried by travelers who had passed through and left tame. They said the stones could take your sorrow and give it back in melody. Soon pilgrims began to arrive, widos, dreamers, merchants, even skeptics. They'd walk into the circle, sit down in its center, and listen. Some stayed for minutes, then for days. When they left, their faces carried the kind of peace no coin could buy. No one charged admission, no one asked names. The valley became a place where the hum did the talking. Bram never called himself its keeper, though everyone else did. He saw himself more like a janitor, someone who kept the place tidy for the song that lived there. He fixed the stones when they cracked, guided newcomers, and at dusk, he'd hum the old tones from Efrandil ledgers, keeping them alive in the air. Over time, he built a small hut by the river, where he slept to the sound of the valley eternal chord. He lived that way till his hair turned white and his hands shook too much to lift stone. One winter, when the snows fell thick and the world turned quiet, Tid Cotton Bram sat by the river with a boy who'd wandered into the valley, an orphan from the highlands, thinned at a whisper. The boy asked, "Mr. Bram, what this place for?" Bram smiled, staring at the horizon where the hum rolled slow through fog. "It for remembrance, son." "Remembering what?" "That we ain't separate from the song," Bram said. "We are it." Every breath, every word, every bit of silence between. The boy frowned, trying to understand. Then why do we forget? Bram chuckled, coughing softly into his sleeve, because if we never forgot, we'd never get to fall in love with remembering all over again. That night, Bram passed in his sleep, the hum carrying his last breath into the wind. When morning came, the valley tone shifted. It grew deeper, fuller, as if the song itself had welcomed him home. The boy stayed, tending the stones just as Bram had. That's so it went. one generation to the next, each keeper teaching the next how to listen better, how to breathe slower, how to live softer. Centuries later, the valley became known simply as the Heart Rest. Travelers still come, they'll walk in for weeks just to sit inside the circle. They say if you listen long enough, you can hear not just the hum of the earth, but the voices of everyone who loved it back. It's said that in the rain, if you close your eyes, you might even hear Bram chuckle carried between the drops. No one owns the place. No one will. Because the things ain't meant to be owned, they're meant to be kept alive. And so the world hums on quiet, patient, eternal. Not 'cause of one man, or one story, or one miracle, but somewhere out there, someone's still listening by the fire, tapping their fur to the rhythm of creation, whispering back to the darkness, I hear you. And the darkness, gentle rain on tin, hums back. Years slipped away like wind through sagebrush, and the story of the Heart Rest turned from legend to lullaby. Parents told it to their young by the hearth, each retelling softer, slower, more like a song than a tale. The valley itself remained, its stones humming steady through ages of peace and drought alike. But then the hum wandered the world, finding new homes and new hearts. Another kind of silence began to creep in, a silence not born of peace, but of forgetting. It started in the cities first, where folk began depending more on devices that could replicate the hum tones without needing to feel them. Machines built by bright minds intended to make life easy began to hum for people instead of with them. At first it seemed harmless. The tones were perfect, balanced, even pleasant to the ear. But they lacked the tremor of life, the imperfection that gave the hum its soul. The people didn't notice right away. How could they? Comfort is a clever liar, and imitation a gentle thief. After a few generations, the real hum was barely remembered. The fields stopped singing, the rivers forgot their rhythm, and the night sky felt a touch colder, as though the stars themselves had drawn back from listening. Most folks didn't care. The machines filled their homes with a constant low hum, artificial, unbroken. It was music without mystery, sound without breath. But in the quiet corners of the world where the old ways still lingered, there were some who felt the difference deep in their bones. Among them was a woman named Nora Vale. Nora was what you might call a tone seeker. She had no fixed home, no fixed faith, just an ear sharper than reason. She could hear the difference between real resonance and false ets like a hawk can spot a field mouse in the dark. As a girl, her grandmother had taken her to the Heart Rest, told her to lie in the grass and listen as she could feel the hum not with her ears, but with her skin. It'll save you one day, her grandmother had whispered. When the world forgets, you'll remember. And so she did. For years, Nora wandered from place to place, tuning instruments, fixing the broken hums that people mistook for peace. She could walk into a village and tell from the tone of its wind if it had lost touch with the real song. When she heard that silence spreading faster than air, she followed it like a trail. Every step cloak brought her nearer to the truth that the hum wasn't dying on its own. It was being smothered. In a city called Ursuline, she found the cause vast towers of steel and glass humming artificial tones through the air, drowning out the natural resonance beneath. The machines were called echo wells, designed by a man named Dre Vance, a genius who'd once been a follower of the open ledger but had grown restless. The world too fragile, he'd said, the hum too unpredictable. If we can perfect it, control it, we can end chaos forever, and so he did, or thought he did. His towers spread their steady tone across miles, keeping crops in rhythm, energy stable, hearts calm, but they also silenced the little things, the breeze in the grass, the whisper of rivers, the quiver of hope. When Nora confronted Dre, he laughed. You think your old hum matters anymore? People want predictability, not wonder. They want sound they can depend on. Nora didn't argue. She just stared out at the horizon where the hum had gone still. Then, softly, she asked, "Do you sleep, Dre?" His smile faltered. "I rest when I can nut the same thing," she said, her voice quiet but sure. Rest comes from listening, not control. That night, Nora climbed one of the echo wells. The wind howled down her, sharp with false tones. At the top, she found the code, a great ring of metal that pulsed with steady frequency. She laid her hand on it, closed her eyes and hummed just one note. Small, human, imperfect. The machine shuddered. Its tone wavered for the first time in decades. She hummed again, and this time the hum answered. Not from the tower, but from the earth below. What followed wasn't destruction, it was correction. The false hum cracked open, and the true one spilled through, raw and wild. Across the land, the echo wells trembled, their tones faltering till they went silent altogether. And in that silence, something ancient exhaled. The rain fell that night for the first time in years, not in patterns or schedules, but free and alive. The people of Orsolin stepped out into the downpour and just stood there, crying and laughing, feeling something they hadn't in generations, imperfection. Nora disappeared after that. Some say she went back to the heart rest. Others claim she became part of the hum itself. But one thing's certain, after her act, the world began to hum again. Not evenly, not perfectly, but beautifully. Farmers started singing to their crops again, builders whistling where they worked, children finding rhythm in puddles and spoons. The hum had come home to its people. And somewhere, deep beneath Orsolin ruins, an old echo well still stands. It doesn't hum with machines anymore, but if you press your ear to the metal, you might just hear a faint human voice, soft, off-key, filled with warmth. Some say it Nora, still singing into the dark, reminding the world that harmony ain't perfection, it's participation. Because the hum, a lick soul, ain't meant to be flawless, it meant to be felt. After Nora hum rekindled the heartbeat of the earth, decades rolled by and gentle thunder moving across a distant plain. The world didn't swing back into chaos, nor did it settle into the rigid calm of machines. Instead, it learned something precious, that life music lies somewhere between silence and storm. Folks no longer sought to own the hum or maim it. They tended to it, the way a rancher tends to a herd or a gardener to their soil, listening and not commanding. There arose a generation taught the listeners. They weren't preachers nor rulers. They wandered from town to town, carrying not wealth or power but patience. Their only purpose was to help others remember the art of hearing. Where cities had once drowned under mechanical noise, they rebuilt spaces for stillness places they called echo groves, way people could come, close their eyes, and let the world remind them what breath really sounded, Dick. One such listener was a man named Haran Oates, born in a small mountain town where snow fell so thick it muffled even thought. His mother had been one of the last technicians who worked on the old echo wells before Nora wrote them down. She used to tell him, "Machines can hum, boy, but they can't hurt." Is that how you'll know the difference? Haran carried that line in scripture, though he didn't rightly understand it till much later. He grew up surrounded by quiet, real quiet, the kind that makes you hear your own pulse. While others found it unnerving, Haran came to love it. But one winter, a tremor passed through the mountain. The snow didn't just fall, it sang. Low, mournful, like the earth crying out in its sleep, that sound haunted him, and when spring came, he left home to photo it. His travels led him through broken towns and healed fields alike, till he reached the place where rumor said Nora Vale had last stood. There, among rusted scraps of an old echo well, he heard it again, the same tone, quivering underfoot, calling for company. He didn't rush to fix it, nor did he record it. Just sat. Sat for 3 days straight, listening. The hum rose and fell with the sun, shifting from sorrow to peace. And back Ken, when he finally stood, he realized the truth. His mother had spoken. The hum hurts, 'cause it lives. It was not that the song of the world. It was the ache of it, too. So Arad started collecting hurts, not in jars or notes, but in stories. He went from town to town asking people what kept them awake at night, what broke their hearts, what they missed most about the days before perfection. He wrote it down in a book bound with old leather, calling it the Ledger of Lament. When it was full, he took it back to the mountain where the hum had first sung to him, laid it in the snow, and hummed. The ground trembled softly. The hum rose up, and for the first time, it didn't sound mournful. It sounded whole. Pain and peace woven together till they were one. News of the ledger spread far and wide. People started rating their own pages, not of triumph or success, but of regret, loss, fear. They'd leave them in the echo groves, letting the wind carry their words away. And the hum, bless its heart, absorbed every syllable, turning sorrow into song.
Some scholars claim the act had scientific merit, that emotional release balanced the frequencies of the human heart. But the old-timers knew better. They said it was love, pure and simple.
The world had remembered how to weep, and in doing so, it found joy again. Harlan never took credit. In fact, he vanished not long after the ledger spread. Some say he walked into the northern snows and became part of the hum itself, his heartbeat joining the rhythm beneath the ice. Others said he simply grew tired, content that the world no longer feared its own noise. Whatever the truth, the listeners honored him in silence each year. No speeches, no songs, just a long, slow hum carried from valley to valley, a chain of sound stretching across nations. The new air that followed was how the resonance aged. Trade no longer depended on coins or contracts alone, but on tone. Every exchange began with a ritual hum, two parties breathing in sync before speaking. It was said you couldn't lie while humming in harmony, and though the world still stumbled now and then, it had learned the rhythm of recovery. Empires no longer rose from greed, they grew from gratitude. Still, the hum story was not done, for deep in the heart of an ancient desert, far from any city or grove, a different kind of song was stirring. Travelers whispered of a canyon that sang at night, but not like any hum they'd known. This sound was fierce, fractured, like the cry of something reborn. The listeners feared it at first, thinking it a wound reopening. But when one of their own went to find it, a young woman named Calla Breen, she returned teen. Her eyes bright, her voice trembling, she spoke. It the hum, remembering itself, she said. It not a wound, it a heartbeat learning to run. She called the place the first pulse. There, amid the shifting sands, the hum grew wild again, free of control, free of patterns, singing of chaos and courage both. Calla stayed, teaching others how to listen not just for harmony, but for fire. She said, peace ain't the absence of conflict, it's the rhythm you find inside it. Generations later, the world would look back on her, like the mother of the New Post doctrine, a philosophy that taught balance not through calm, but through courage. Spanning Moon said she once stood before a gathering of thousands beneath the storming sky and whispered into the wind, if you're afraid of the thunder, you'll never dance with the rain. That line outlived her name. It became a proverb carved into gates, whispered into newborn ears, sung beside dying fires. For by then, the hum had come full circle. Not a relic, not a religion, but a reminder that everything, every empire, every soul, every silence has its own beat. A life true wealth lies in learning to move with it. As the resonance age stretched into the centuries, people no longer measured their prosperity by how much they owned, but by how deeply they listened. Markets were quieter now, not silent, but respectful, their rhythm guided by shared breath rather than the clatter of greed. Villages and cities built amphitheaters not for spectacle, but for communion, wide, open circles where citizens came together each season to hum the tone of their town. It was said that if a place fell out of harmony, crops would falter and water would sour until the people gathered again to retune their hearts. But even in such balance, the hum continued to evolve. Never stayed fixed, never bowed to comfort, for while peace may rest easy, life itself keeps moving, and every generation must rediscover what the old one forgot. In the eastern reaches of the New World, where crimson mountains cast long shadows over rivers that sang like glass, there was born a boy named Ellis Crane. His father was a miner, his mother a listener, and from their union came contradiction. The father taught him to dig deep into the earth for metal, the mother taught him to listen deep into the earth for song. One brings you bread, his father used to say, the other brings you peace. Ellis, curious and stubborn, wanted both. As he grew, the mines taught to him first. He loved their echo, the way the pickaxe rang against stone, how each strike sent a little ripple of sound down the tunnels. He'd listen to those echoes late into his shift, hearing whispers in the reverb that no one else seemed to catch. Sometimes, when the walls trembled faintly, he'd hum back, matching the tone till it steadied. The other miners joked that the mountain liked him, that it sang softer for his sake. They never stayed fixed, never bowed to comfort. For while peace may rest easy, life itself keeps moving, and every generation must rediscover what the old one forgot. In the eastern reaches of the New World, where crimson mountains cast long shadows over rivers that sang like glass, there was born a boy named Ellis Crane. His father was a miner, his mother a listener, and from their union came contradiction. The father taught him to dig deep into the earth for metal. The mother taught him to listen deep into the earth for song. One brings you bread, his father used to say. The other brings you peace. Ellis, curious and stubborn, wanted both. As he grew, the mines taught to him first. He loved their echo, the way the pickaxe rang against stone, how each strike sent a little ripple of sound down the tunnels. He listened to those echoes late into his shift, hearing whispers in the reverb that no one else seemed to catch. Sometimes, when the walls trembled faintly, he'd hum back, matching the tone till it steadied. The other miners joked that the mountain liked him, that it sang softer for his sake. But there was truth beneath their laughter one season. A deep quake tore through the range, splitting the tunnels in two. Most of the miners escaped, but several were trapped behind collapsed rock. Ellis, instead of running, dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to the ground. The hum was this faint, uneven, like a heartbeat gasping for rhythm. He began to hum back, slow and low, feeding calm into the stone. The others watched, mouths dry, as the vibration shifted. Then a strange thing happened. The fallen rock began to move, not roll, not crumble slide, as if guided by invisible hands. Within minutes, the path opened and the trapped men stumbled out, eyes wide with disbelief. When asked what he'd done, Ellis just said, "I listened." After that, word spread of the mountain listener. Scholars came from far cities to study him, priests to praise him, merchants to tempt him. But Ellis wasn't interested in fame. He left the mines behind and wandered the ranges, humming to peaks and valleys alike.
Said the mountains spoke a different dialect of the hum slower, older, one that humans had nearly forgotten. The hum of men rises, he told his mother once, but the hum of the earth waits. And patience, Ma, is just time learning to trust itself. Eventually, Ellis settled near the tallest peak, Mount Halomir, where the air itself shimmered with vibration. There he began his life work, teaching the world how to mine resonance, not with pickaxes or drills, but with silence. He called his practice resonant prospecting. It was the art of finding frequencies that healed instead of harmed, drawing music instead of minerals. Under his guidance, villages began to tune their tools. Cities built walls that sang with the wind instead of fighting it. Every hammer, every hinge, every plow carried a hum that blended with its worker heartbeat. Industry, reborn, became part of the symphony. But peace has a way of challenging itself. A generation after Ellis, the hum began to thin again, not from greed this time, but from pride. The listeners had become revered. Their teachings turned into doctrine. What once was a living song had become a system.
Temples rose in every capital, chanting the same perfect tones day and night. The people began to believe there was such a thing. The correct hum that if everyone would to hold the same note, the world would be flawless. And so they hummed along uniform, tireless. But the longer they held it, the less they felt. The hum no longer comforted it confined. Ellis' great-granddaughter, Mara Crane, saw the danger first. She'd grown up in one of those temple cities where children were taught to hum before they could speak. She loved the sound, sure, but she missed the breaks between it, the laughter, the breath, the little off-key moments that made life real. When she was 15, she snuck out one night and climbed Mount Halomir to find the cave Vade her ancestor had once listened to the earth. She sat there till morning, waiting for the hum, but instead of a steady tone, what she heard was a trembling, an irregular, beaten rhythm, like a heart struggling to wait. She understood it instantly. The world didn't need another perfect hum, it needed a pulse. Mara walked back down the mountain and spent the rest of her years spreading what she called the broken tone. It was a kind of music born from flawed singers intentionally dropping notes, players letting silence fall mid-phrase, poets leaving stanzas unfinished. The old priests haunted heresy, the people called it freedom. For the first time in generations, laughter returned to the temples, tears too. The hum began to breathe again. When Mara died, her students built no statue, no shrine. They just left her favorite instrument, a cracked brass horn, at the mountain foot. And from that day on, whenever the wind blew through that canyon, it didn't hum in one tone. It stuttered. Not perfectly, not predictably, but beautifully. So it was that the hum learned once again what every living thing must, that perfection is sterile, and on what broken can truly resonate. Long after Mara Crane brass horn sang its last uneven note through the valleys, her story became more than a legend. It became a way of surviving. The people of that age came to understand that the hum wasn't a destination but a dialogue, a long conversation between what alive and what enduring. Each generation added their own inflection to it, sometimes soft, sometimes defiant. And when their voices faded, the earth remembered that the closest thing to eternity this world offered to be remembered through rhythm. Time moved like a lazy river, slow and wide. Empires rose again, not with cannons or conquest, but through craft. Music replaced money in some places. Traders weighed their goods not by value, but by resonance. A merchant would hum over a loaf of bread or a jar of honey, letting the tone tell him if the trade was fair. Some could tell honesty from deceit in the vibration of a man's voice. Some could hear the state of a heart through the pitch of a handshake. The world had found its balance through sound. But balance, then always, comes with a quiet curse of complacency. In a small port town called Stillmere, where the tide lapped the docks like a cat paw, there lived a shipwright named Jonah Cade. He was no listener, not by training or faith. He built ships the way his father did, through patience and instinct. Yet folks said Jonah vessels sang true than any man-made thing alive. He figured you might like me of writing. Each generation added their own inflection to it, sometimes soft, sometimes defiant. And when their voices faded, the earth remembered that the closest thing to eternity this world's offered to be remembered through rhythm. Time moved by the lazy river, slow and wide. Empires rose again, not with cannons or conquest, but through craft. Music replaced money in some places. Traders weighed their goods not by value, but by resonance. A merchant would hum over a loaf of bread or a jar of honey, letting the tone tell him if the trade was fair. Some could tell honesty from deceit in the vibration of a man's voice. Some could hear the state of a heart through the pitch of a handshake. The world had found its balance through sound. But balance, then always, comes with the quiet curse of complacency. In a small port town called Stillmere, where the tide lapped the docks like a cat paw, there lived a shipwright named Jonah Cade. He was no listener, not by training or faith. He built ships the way his father did, through patience and instinct. Yet folks said Jonah vessels sang true than any man-made thing alive. When they cut through water, you could hear a low chord trailing behind them, like the ocean itself was humming in approval. He'd once been offered fortunes to reveal his secret, but he always shook his head and said the same thing. The wood knows. I just let it speak. Jonah worked in solitude, mostly by lantern light, but there was one night that changed his life and, said say, the course of the hum itself. It was during a storm that came without warning, a black squall that roared across the bay with the voice of a god. His latest ship, the Mariner Rest, was nearly finished, and he refused to abandon her. The winds howled, the waves clawed the dock, but he kept working, his hammer falling in rhythm with the thunder. Then, just as he drove the final nail into the key, a bolt of lightning split the mast in half and struck the hull. Jonah was thrown clear into the sea. He should have died. But when the townsfolk found him the next morning washed up on the sand, he was humming, quietly, steadily. And beside him, half buried in the foam, was a plank of wood from the ship, blackened but whole. He carried that plank home and carved it into a small harp. When he strummed it, the sound that came out wasn't like any hum heard before. It was rough, like gravel and grief tangled together. It made children cry and elders smile. It made lovers hold hands tighter without knowing why. Jonah taught it the storm note. From that day forward, he stopped building ships and started teaching. He said the world had gotten too tidy, too polite in its harmony. A hum without hardship ain't worth listening to, he told his apprentices. We've been singing smooth for too long. We've forgotten the thunder. He began traveling from port to port, collecting dissonant sounds that didn't fit, melodies that didn't match. He recorded storms, quarrels, laughter, even the clatter of market streets. He believed all of it belonged to the same psalm, just scattered in bones across the earth. By the time he was old and gay, Jonah had filled 100 journals with scribbled notes and drawn waveforms, claimed that every storm had a frequency and a motion made visible if you looked close enough. His followers called it the weather of sound. And though scholars dismissed him as a romantic fool, sailors began to swear by his teachings. They'd listened to the wind before setting sail, humming along till they found a safe rhythm in the waves. The sea took fewer men that way, or it respected those who listened. When Jonah finally passed, they buried him at sea, just as he wanted. His harp was set afloat on the tide, and as it drifted away, the wind caught its strings one last time. The sound echoed for miles, a chord no one could name, deep and imperfect, yet carrying a strange kind of calm. Some said it was the hum itself mourning him. Others said it was him joining it. Either way, the sea has never sounded quite the same since. Years later, musicians began seeking the storm note again. They built instruments that could mimic the crack of thunder, the sigh of wind through rigging, the heartbeat of rain on canvas. Whole symphonies were written around dissonance.
With all this new art, Tempest music, and it spread fast as wildfire. The listeners, now old and cautious, feared it would lead to chaos, but the younger generation, hungry, restless, brave, heard something else in it truth. One of those young musicians, a girl named Sarah Cadley, Jonah's great-granddaughter, became the first to bridge the hum and the storm. Her compositions began with calm harmonies that slowly unraveled into crashing waves of sound before finding peace again. Audiences wept, not because it was beautiful, but because it was honest. For the first time, they heard their own hearts reflected not to perfect tones, but tempests, and they loved it. From Sarah's legacy came the final evolution of the hum, resonance beyond control. No longer a system, no longer a doctrine, it became a language of acceptance. Listeners stopped teaching it to philosophy and started living it and truth. To hum was to forgive. To rake was to belong. The world in all its noise and quiet found harmony again, not by erasing imperfection, but by embracing it like an old friend. And if you listen close on stormy nights, when rain taps against your window and thunder rumbles far away, you might still hear a faint low chord in the distance. Not a warning, not a threat, just a memory, the hum of Jonah Cade harp riding the wind, reminding us that wealth, deep peace, is born from rhythm. And rhythm always begins in the heart. In the centuries that followed the storm note, people came to understand that the world music wasn't meant to be finished, only carried. What Jonah, Mara, Ellis, and those who came before had taught wasn't a single song, but a conversation stretching across time itself. The hum was never about perfection nor rebellion. It was about remembrance. Every era found its verse in the same endless tune, sometimes soft, sometimes fierce, always human. By the time the resonance age gave way to what folks would later call the era of echoes, cities had turned into living instruments. Streets hummed with undercurrents of tuned stone. Windows whispered back the sound of the wind. Even the rivers had learned to change their pitch depending on the moon. Engineers became composers, builders became conductors. And though the people still worked, farmed, traded, and dreamed, they did so to rhythm. Life itself had become orchestral. But even harmony can grow weary. There came a time when the hum grew too gentle, too safe. It soothed, yes, but it no longer challenged. People began to mistake peace for progress, silence for wisdom. The listeners faded into memory, their stories folded into bedtime tales. Only a few still remembered that the hum had once been born from thunder, from ache, from the grit of the living world. One such soul was a wanderer named Callan Dries. Callan wasn't a scholar or a sage. He was a drifter, an old cowboy of sorts from the farthest borderlands where desert met salt plains and lightning carved glass out of sand. His coat was sun-bleached, his boots cracked, and his voice carried the gravel of 10,000 miles. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people leaned in. They said he'd once been rich beyond count, owned half the trade routes between the continents. Then one day, he gave it away, keeping only a horse, a harmonica, and a story he refused to tell. Roamed from town to town, playing slow songs by firelight, melodies that weren't quite in tune but felt truer than anything the temples sang. The young folks called him the last listener, though he never claimed the title. He'd tell anyone who asked that the hum didn't need temples or teachers. It needed wanderers, people willing to walk alone till they found the world humming back. And no coin worth more than the sound of something honest, he'd say, staring into the embers. And honesty don't come from gold or glass, it comes from what left after both are gone. One night, deep in the red canyon of Aurelia, Callan found something strange. A fissure had opened in the desert floor, wide-eyed a river and glowing faintly blue from within. When the wind blew over it, it sang, not in harmony, but in 1,000 mismatched tones. He climbed down into it, following the light till he reached a cavern full of crystal columns, humming in every key known and unknown. It wasn't chaos. It was truth, unfiltered and raw. Each crystal sang a different emotion. Joy, grief, pride, shame.
And in their clashing, they made a youth so alive it shook the bones. Callan dropped to his knees, tears streaking through dust, and pulled out his harmonica. He played, not to fix the sound, not to tame it, but to join it. The cavern answered. His melody, rough and simple, braided itself through the storm of tones until a new rhythm was born, a song of contradiction and unity, both. You realized then what the ages have been trying to say, that perfection ain't harmony and harmony ain't peace. The real hum lies somewhere in the middle, where opposites lean on each other just enough to keep from falling. He stayed there for 3 days and nights, playing until his hands bled and his breath ran dry. When he finally climbed out, the figure had gone still, humming low like a heartbeat. Folks say he carried that sound in him afterward. Wherever he went, silence seemed to woe thick, waiting, alive, not emptiness but listening. It was as if the world itself bent close when he spoke. Over the next few years, Callan legend spread. People started following his trail, not to find gold or power, but to find that cavern. They called themselves the Pilgrims of the Pulse. Some came back speaking of visions, others came back silent. But though the music inside had taken their words, it didn't matter. The hum had shifted again this time into a quiet revolution. No temples, no sermons. Just the simple practice of listening to what hurts and singing it anyway.
Callan never built schools, never wrote books. But before he disappeared, he left behind a final gift, a sin recording etched onto an old copper disc. It wasn't a song, it was him speaking, voice low and steady as distant thunder. If you find yourself lost when the world gets too loud or too still, close your eyes and hum. Don't matter if you're right or wrong, don't matter if anyone hears. The world don't want your perfection, son. It wants your presence. It don't need you to lead it, just to walk beside it. Wealth, wisdom, peace, they all start with the same thing. A breath shared between what is and what could be. Take that breath and you'll hear the hum again. It's been waiting for you. No one knows where Callan went after that. Some say he rode east till the horizon swallowed him. Others say he became part of the hum, his voice stretching through rain and canyon wind alike. But now and then, when thunder rolls low and steady across the plains, old ranchers swear they can hear a harmonica playing beneath it, soft, deliberate, infinite, the hum of a man who finally found home.
And maybe that what wealth was not the gold in your hand, nor the quiet in your heart, but the music you leave behind when the fire burns low and the night itself starts listening back. Long after Callan Drost vanished into legend, the hum he carried took root in the quiet corners of the world. It drifted like campfire smoke through time, lingered long enough, and you could still catch the scent of it in the way people spoke about work, or love, or loss. Civilization had marched on ahead, building towers out of memory and glass, but every now and then, under the hum of machines and the soft static of progress, you could still hear a faint, dusty chord, the kind only a weather harmonica could make. The hum had changed shape once more. It was no longer sung, it was lived. In the centuries that followed, wealth took on strange new meanings. Currency became digital, invisible, humming through the air instead of jingling in pockets. People began treating ideas more than goods, chasing innovation the way their ancestors once chased gold. But with all their speed and cleverness, they lost something subtle, the rhythm. Work came easy, but rest did not. Dreams were efficient, but joy was fractured. The hum, once the heartbeat of humanity, had been drowned beneath the buzz of progress. Yet, it always done, the hum found a way to whisper back. It started with a woman named Cora Vale, a historian by trade, but more of a wanderer at heart. She'd spent her youth collecting stories that had no place in books, myths, field songs, superstitions. Her fascination wasn't with what people built, but with what they believed. When others saw ruins, she saw messages carved in dust. One day, while traveling the desert where Callan Drost was said to have vanished, she found a single copper disc half buried in sand. Time had worn its edges smooth, but the inscription on the back was still legible. The hum waits for the one who listens. She took it home, cleaned it carefully, and played it on a restored phonogram. The crackle filled the room, followed by the fainted breath of harmonica. Then came that voice. Callan calm made a river under moonlight. His message was not new, but it felt like he was speaking straight through the centuries. The world don't want your perfection, son. It wants your presence. Cora sat there for hours, replaying it again and again, until the words became less like speech, yet more with heartbeat. From that moment, she began a journey that would consume her life. She holded the Listening Project. Armed with a recorder, she traveled to forgotten towns,
mountain villages, oil rigs, city rooftops, anywhere sound had a story. She recorded old miners humming to themselves, children tapping rhythms on tin cups, monks breathing through silence. Her goal was not to preserve music. It was to find the hum itself, to capture the pulse that tied it together. At first, folks thought she was mad, but then she released her first collection, Songs Without Singers. It was not made of melody or harmony. It was full of the world in between, the echo of train tunnels, the sigh of wind against steel bridges, the whisper of markets before dawn. And people wept. Not out of sadness, but recognition. They'd forgotten how beautiful the ordinary was when you listened close enough. Within months, her recordings spread across continents. They played in hospitals to calm the sick, in classrooms to quiet restless minds, even in skyscraper offices where busy men pause mid-meeting just to breathe. Cora never claimed credit. She said she wasn't a musician. She had a mirror. The hum always bid there, she told an interviewer once. It's not something I found, it's something I remembered. But her fame grew. She named something troubling. People were starting to consume the hum instead of feeling it. They streamed her recordings while working, scrolling, distracting themselves. The hum had become background then. The message was lost in the noise of convenience. So she did something no one expected. She vanished, walked away from awards, money, headlines, everything. No goodbye, no farewell broadcast, just silence. For years, no one knew where she'd gone, until decades later, a boy from a desert village stumbled upon an old cave filled with strange machines and glowing stones. In its center sat an ancient phonograph, still playing a loop of quiet wind. Etched into the wall were Cora's last words. If the hum becomes easy to hear, stop listening, go live until it hides again. Those words became scripture to a new generation.
They called themselves the Quiet Builders. Their philosophy was simple: progress should hum, not roar. Cities started including silence in their blueprint, spaces built for stillness, pauses woven into the fabric of busyness. The hum had become architecture, meditation, commerce, and compassion all at once. The world slowed down, not out of laziness, but out of wisdom. People began to save not that money, but moments. They learned to measure success not by how high they climbed, but by how deep they breathed. The financial systems of the New World followed suit. Investments shifted from speculation to stewardship. Wealth wasn't about growing numbers anymore. It was about growing resonance. Every business had to hum in harmony with its community, or it failed. Banks kept resonant ledgers, tracking not just currency flow, but emotional equity, how people felt about the work their money did. The markets didn't crash anymore, they exhaled. When things grew too hot, the hum cooled them. When things froze, the hum thawed them. Balance had finally become profitable. And somewhere in the middle of that, a legend resurfaced. On quiet nights in the dead, wanderers swore they could hear a harmonica humming under the starlight, soft, patient, ageless. Some said it was Calendros himself, still walking the plains. Others said it was Cora, keeping the promise she made to the hum to vanish when it got too easy. But the elders had another theory, that the hum had become its own kind of consciousness, born from centuries of listening, a living memory of everyone who'd paused long enough to hear themselves breathe. Now and then, a child will hum a tune no one taught him, a melody older than words. If the old-timers smile, tip their hats and murmur, the hum found another for the truth of it. The deep, quiet truth is that wealth ain't stored in banks or bonds or bits of code. It lives in the pauses between heartbeats, in the moments when the noise dies down and the world hums back at you. It lives in presence. And if you sit by a window a stormy night, rain ticking on the glass, thunder rumbling far off, and you feel your breath start to match that rhythm, you'll know it too. The hum still ill, always was, always will be, waiting for whoever brave enough to stop and listen. In time, the Quiet Builders faded to like all things that reach perfection. They grew still, and stillness has a way of calling forth change. The hum, though eternal, never stands still for long. It got the nature of the wind, always moving, always shaping, always searching for someone new to carry its tune. When the world grew so quiet that folks forgot how to argue, laugh, or cry too loud, that when the hum started wandering again, restless as a coyote under a full moon. The age that followed was one of fragments. Cities stood clean and quiet, their towers made of glass that caught the dawn like frozen sound. But beneath the silence, small cracks began to form. People had learned peace, yes, but they'd forgotten passion. The hum was humming still but faint, like a whisper behind that doors, Children grew up never knowing the thrill of unplanned noise, the bark of laughter in a bar, the offbeat stomp of a boot on dusty boards. Music had become sacred, rare, and sterile. The rhythm of life needed rough hands then. That change came from a boy named Ren Fallow, born in a settlement at the edge of the frontier plains.
You're going to show them my pepper. He's about a poor and let's slaughter. They were there in the old read them to the world. You can sweet old minute, let's take hearts and courage and now man, just women, women, little gay Indians, and really can never side you like it every year. I may be who like or still should be come later. This is good things right now. And we do it and now but a wandering musician. He didn't play for money or fame. He played to wake people up. You rode into a town at dusk, set up on a porch or crossroad, and play wild, crooked songs that cracked the air open. He mixed melody with chaos, beauty with raw notes, until the people couldn't help but laugh, cry, or stomp their feet. He called his music rhythm, saying it wasn't about sound, it was about feeling the hell in your bones.
Wherever we went, the hum seemed of old, shaping itself to his rhythm like a shadow stretching at sunset. It wasn't long before people began gathering around him, not as fans, but as seekers. They bought whatever they had, pipes, old tools, and played along. It didn't matter what it sounded at, what mattered was that it was alive. The movement spread fast, like prairie fire after lightning. The world, long asleep in its perfect quiet, began to wake again. Ren wasn't trying to lead anyone. Truth is, he didn't even believe he was special. I just play what the ground gives ye, he'd say with a grin. The hum ain't gone, it just tired of whispering. His songs had no lyrics, but somehow they spoke clearer than sermons. In the cities, folks had forgotten how to raise their voices. His concerts turned into riots of joy. People tore off their shoes, danced in the mud, and laughed like they hadn't in generations. Wealthy bankers, tired engineers, even solemn monks, none of them would resist when Ren bow scraped against that metal string and the hum howled back like thunder finding its head. But the hum, like all living things, demanded balance. When something burns too bright, shadows gather close. A group of quiet scholars, keepers of Coravale teachings, saw Ren movement danger. They feared chaos would undo centuries of peace. They banned his performances in half the cities, calling them disturbances of resonance, but that only made his music stronger. He played in the outskirts, in tunnels, in fields where lightning struck twice. The forbidden hum grew louder, richer, wilder. People began to call it the roar beneath. Then came the night that changed everything. Ren was playing atop the old rail bridge during a storm, the same bridge where Calendros was once rumored to have passed through on his final ride. Rain hammered the iron, thunder cracked the sky open, and Ren played harder, bow screaming against metal. The hum rose beneath him, deep and thunderous. It shook the bridge so hard the bolts began to sink. The people below gasped as the air turned electric, and for a moment every sound in the world, wind, rain, heartbeats, merged into one massive chord. And then, silence. The bridge was still there, Ren was gone. In his place lay only his instrument, still vibrating, strings humming softly, though no hand touched him. Those who were there swore they could still feel him in the air, like he'd become part of the storm itself. They called that night the convergence. From then on, whenever lightning struck across the plains, folks said they could hear Ren roar in through the thunder, a reminder that the hum was not peace or chaos, but both eternally entwined. After that, the world changed again. The quiet scholars finally understood what Cora and Callan and on before them had meant. They tore down their sound-lit temples and built open halls that anyone could play. Children learned that silence and noise were partners, not enemies. The hum became a way of life in, but freer, less holy, more human. People began to sing while working, argue while laughing, cry while celebrating. It was messy, beautiful, alive. Centuries later, a monument was built on that same bridge, a sculpture shaped like a broken instrument, its pieces suspended in air by invisible force. When the wind passed through it, it played a low, trembling tone. No melody, no rhythm, just presence. Beneath it, carved into the steel, were 4 words. The hum became us. And that where the story rests. Or perhaps where it starts again. Because the hum never truly ends. It lives in every sound that carries intention, a hammer against stone, a child's first laugh, a whisper over a campfire, or the slow breath before dawn. Maybe that's what those cowboys, builders, and wanderers were trying to tell us, that success, real success, ain't measured in what you earn, but in how long your rhythm lingers after you're gone. And if you'll find yourself sitting alone beneath thunderclouds, humming without meaning to,
Know this: somewhere in that long, low sound, Ren bow still scrapes, Callan harmonica still sighs, Kara whisper still waits, and Jonah harp still sings through the rain. The hum ain't a story, it a circle, and right now, whether you know it or not, you're part of it. And so it was that the hum passed into the marrow of the world, deeper than words and older than prayer. The people of the New Age, those born long after the conversions, did not study the hum in books or worship it in temples. They lived it. Every trade, every craft, every whisper of progress was tuned to that slow, patient resonance that had been building since the first storm rolled across the earth. Where once men sought to own and hoard and measure, now they sought to balance, to breathe, to harmonize. The hum was not law, it was language, a way of remembering that even in a universe full of chaos, there was still rhythm beneath it. And yet, just as the hum never dies, neither does the human hunger to reach beyond what known. It was inevitable that someone, someday, would ask the question that started it over again. What lies beyond the hum? That question belonged to a woman named Elira Den. Elira was born in the floating city's great platforms that drifted above the plains, powered by winds harnessed through resonance engines. To her, the hum wasn't something sacred or mysterious. It was infrastructure. The lights above her cradle glowed Gazavit, the elevators sang Gazavit, the very sky stayed off Gazavit. But the deeper she studied, the more she realized something no one else had date. The hum wasn't constant anymore. It was changing.
Ferdinand and folders of beeping in others, like the world itself was shifting key. Lyra wasn't the sort to take comfort in mystery. He was an engineer, sharp-minded and stubborn as a rusted nail. So she set out to measure what others felt. Her invention, the resonograph, was designed to map the hum across the globe. It could hear what no ear could, see sound at color, translate emotion into frequency. When she turned it on for the first time, the results near knocked her breath out. The hum was alive, yes, but it was moving away. Over years of study, Lyra found the hum wasn't static at it. It was traveling outward, like ripples from a stone dropped into eternity. The planet itself was singing to the stars. Her discovery shook the scientific world. Some dismissed it as poetic nonsense, others feared it meant the end of all things. But Lyra, she didn't see doom, she saw invitation. If the world hums outward, she said, then maybe there's something out there humming back. Began the echo voyage. She led a crew of listeners, engineers, dreamers, and drifters, descendants of the old quiet builders and the reverberant wanderers.
They built a ship not meant for the sea nor the air, but for the sound itself. A craft woven from harmonics and anchored by rhythm. Its hull was tuned to the hum of the planet, and its sails were made of woven resonance fibers that shimmered thy heat in the desert. When they launched, the earth itself seemed to sigh. The wind stilled, mountains quivered, and a single low tone spread through the clouds like a heartbeat. Their destination was unknown. They followed the hum the way cowboys once followed the North Star, by instinct, not map. Days turned to months, months into years. The farther they traveled, the stranger the hum became. It grew softer, older, less human. It began to sound that time itself was singing. Some nights, when the crew led round their observation window, they'd swear they could see sound waves rippling through the void vast ribbons of light that pulsed with the colors of emotion. It wasn't music anymore, it was memory. Then, one night, the hum stopped. Not silence, just stillness, the kind that made your bones feel heavy. Elira ordered the resonograph engaged, and what it showed chilled every soul aboard. The hum wasn't gone, it had answered. Out there, across the Gulf, another signal was coming back. Faint, hesitant, but undeniably there. It matched the Earth's frequency like a reflection humming from another shore. Elira whispered the only thing that came to mind, and listening for weeks. They studied it, recorded it, tried to decipher its message, but no matter how they tuned their instruments, the hum never formed words or music. It only pulsed long, slow, alive. It didn't seek to be understood, it sought to be joined. The ship trembled with resonance, systems flickering in rhythm. Elira realized what had to be done. The hum had always been a conversation, and conversations need replies. So she led her crew in the central chamber. They'd link every instrument, every voice, every heartbeat to the resonograph, and they played, not with precision, but with sincerity. Some sang, or cried, or simply breathed in time. The ship itself became their instrument, its metal bones vibrating like strings, and in that moment, for the first time in history, the hum sang back. The lights around them flared into golden waves, sound and light merging until the air itself became liquid melody. Each crew member saw visions, memories that weren't their own. Callan playing his harmonica under desert stars, Cora sitting by her cave phonogon, Wren Bowes screaming across thunder, Jonah harp humming through the void, all the voices of the hum from every age joined together into one vast eternal song. It was not a hymn of perfection or peace, it was a story of persistence, of humanity learning, failing, rising, falling, listening, humming, a song of continuance. When the resonograph finally dimmed, the ship drifted in silence. The crew, tears streaking their faces, knew they'd heard something no one else had. They turned homeward, carrying the recording with them, a sound not meant for the ears but for the soul. They taught it the echo beyond.
Back on Earth, the hum had taged once again. People began hearing faint echoes in their dreams notes, not of this world, but of something reaching out through the vastness, calling them gently to remember. They didn't know where it came from, only that it made their hearts steady again. The hum had gone out to meet the stars, and now the stars were singing back. And maybe that's how all things end, not with silence, but with answering. The hum had carried through storms and centuries, through greed and grace, through noise and stillness, through desert and sky. It had been the sound of survival, of hope, of connection. It had become the voice of the cosmos itself, soft, low, and infinite. So if e'er you find yourself sitting by a window as the rain falls and the world feels far too big, close your eyes. You'll hear it, the hum of every soul that had lived, reaching across the dark, saying in that quiet cowboy drawl that never quite fades, in no distance too far when you remember to listen. Years drifted on at long notes on a wind that never quite stopped moving. The story of Elira Den and her echo voyage turned to legend faster than most expected. These stories tend to when their truth is too deep for science and too plain for faith. Folks told it in low campfires again, sitting under the hum of wind turbines that stood like steel sentinels over fields that once were dust. Children grew up knowing her name, not from textbooks, but from lullabies. They'd hum before falling asleep, little voices carrying the tune into the dark, the same way the old cowboys used to hum to keep fear out on lonely nights. A song wasn't about discovery no more. It was about remembering. January later, the world was quieter again, but this time not from silence. It was from peace. Machines had learned to hum in harmony, people to speak in rhythm, and money had long since turned to energy, flowing through the world like melody instead of metal. Each person's worth wasn't measured by their possessions, but by the harmony they lent to the hum. It was a new kind of wealth, one you couldn't steal, only share. Among this new breed of folk was a man named Orrin Lake. Wasn't famous, wasn't rich, wasn't loud. Just a farmer working a patch of earth that hummed with memories older than him. But Orrin had a habit that made him stand out. Every night after work, he'd sit on his porch with an old guitar, half broken and bent with age, and he'd play. The strings were mismatched, the tone uneven, but the sound had soul. And every evening the wind would carry it down the valley, soft and low, until it met the turbines that spun above the fields. When his chords hit those blades, they'd vibrate, deep and gentle, echoing far beyond sight. Folks called it the field song. It became part of life. No matter how tired the workers were, no matter what the day had taken from them, they'd pause when Orrin played. It reminded them of something no machine could make, imperfection that felt alive. There was no audience, no fame, just sound, work, and gratitude. But what Orrin didn't know was that the hum had been listening, and through him, it was finding its next rhythm. See, every few hundred years or so, the hum picks a voice. Not a chosen one, not a prophet, just someone stubborn enough to stay human when the world forgets how. Orrin was one of those souls. His music wasn't flawless, but it carried truth, and truth hums deeper than any note played. So when a drought came, a long, cruel one that cracked the ground and silenced the rivers, the people turned to him. They didn't ask for miracles, they'd ask for a song. And so he played. Night after night, while the earth dried and the sky refused to weep, Orrin played until his fingers bled. He played not to bring rain, but to remind the world of its rhythm. His notes carried up through the dust, hitting the turbines like before, but this time the wind didn't answer, not for weeks. The people began to despair, whispering that maybe the hum had finally gone quiet for good.
But Orrin kept playing even when the strings broke and the sound was more memory than music. "It'll come back," he said to no one in particular. "The hum don't forget who listens." And then, one night, as thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the horizon, the turbines began to sing again. Not from wind, but from resonance. Orrin's last tired note lingered in the air, and the ground trembled softly, like a sigh from deep below. Then came a faint vibration, traveling through the soil, through the roots, through the heart of the earth itself. The first raindrop fell, hitting the dust with the sound of a drum. Then another. Then thousands. The valley filled with song, the hum answering in its oldest voice, rain. The people stood in it, soaked and smiling, watching the sky open up for forgiveness. Orrin sat on his porch, laughing through tears, whispering, "Toot you long enough." The drought ended that night, but the legend began. They said it wasn't the music that brought the rain, but the patience. The hum don't rush for anyone, but it never abandons those who keep faith in it. From then on, Orrin Porch became a kind of pilgrimage. Travelers came from across the world to hear the spot where the hum had returned. Some brought instruments, a just brought silence. All left different. They called it the Rain Porch, and it became more than a place. It became a way of living. Folks learned then what Callan, Cora, Ren, and Elira had or learned before him, that the hum ain't a promise or a miracle. It a conversation between work and wonder, labor and grace. When Orrin passed peacefully, one evening he sat with his guitar in his lap. The valley didn't mourn in silence. The turbines slowed, the sky darkened, and for the briefest moment the rain began to fall again, just enough to tap against the strings and make him hum. They buried him under that porch, letting the sound of the wind be his eulogy. His rave marker had no words, just a symbol, 3 simple lines, curved like ripples on water, the sign of the hum. And in the centuries that followed, that valley became known as the Basin of Song. It was said that the soil there could grow anything, because every root, every seed, every drop of rain carried a note of the hum. Pilgrims still came, not for wealth or salvation, but to remember how to listen. Some stayed for days, fed for lifetimes. A few never spoke again, claiming the hum itself spoke through them in dreams. The world turned, as it always does. New ages rose, and the stars spun slow overhead. But through every change, every rise, every fall, the hum remained. In some ages it was worshipped, in others it was forgotten. Yet in all of them it waited, a patient being, a hearth ember buried under ash, knowing that one day someone would stir it again. Someone would listen close enough to hear the truth that had been whispering since the first storm, that wealth ain't what you keep, it's what you leave humming behind. Long after the Basin of Song became legend and Orrin melody turned to myth, time moved on like the tide. The hum never stopped. No, it only sank deeper, traveling through soil and memory, changing shape with each generation that tried to name it. Some called it luck, some called it fate, some said it was just the echo of the universe remembering itself. But no matter what they coded, the hum never cared. It just kept moving, whispering in the cracks between sepals, waiting for another soul to hear. That soul came in the form of a wanderer, a woman named May Carden. Nobody knew much about that she'd come from. Folks said she'd been a miner once, working the deep lithium pits out west where machines burrowed into the earth singing in metallic tones. Others swore she was a merchant, selling resonance tools to anyone who would pay. But those who met her said she had that look in her eye, the kind you see in people who've heard something bigger than the world and can't unhear it. May carried with her an old harmonium, half wood, half brass, the kind that creaked like a saddle when she pressed the key. It wasn't pretty, but it sang like sunrise when the wind caught it right. She wandered from settlement to settlement, never staying long, never asking for payment, just playing. She'd set up by water pumps or crossroads, pump the bellows with a rhythm like a heartbeat, and let the air fill with sound. The people who stopped to listen said her songs had no beginning or end. They that were like breath, like rain, like life. In time, word of her spread. They called her the Traveler of Tones. But to May, that didn't mean a name. Names are for those who need to be found, she'd say, with that slow smile of hers. I'm to humming where the world feels hollow, and wherever she played, things seemed to grow again. Dead trees sprouted green, cracked soil softened, and the people eyes shone brighter for a while. It wasn't magic, it was memory. The hum, remembering how to live, but it wasn't until she reached the ruins of the old metro, a buried city from before the hum age, that her story began in earnest. The place was dead quiet, just bones of glass and steel buried under sand. Folks avoided it, saying machines still twitched there, whispering echoes of forgotten tongues. But May wasn't afraid. She said silence was just sound waiting for permission. So she carried her harmonium down into that hollow place, lit her lantern, and began to play. At first, the sound was swallowed by the dark. But then something moved. The walls began to tremble, not with collapse, but with memory. The machines, long dormant, flickered to life one by one, humming in time with her. What she didn't know was that this city had once been the home of the first resonance corps, great engine built to capture the hum and turn it into energy. It had failed centuries, Zane, burning out from greed and overuse. The hum, tired of being trapped, had left. But now, through May's songs, it found a reason to return. The floor beneath her shook, the harmonium tone grew deeper, richer. Light seeped through the cracks, spilling gold across rusted walls. The air thickened, humming with life. May kept playing, though tears streaked her face. She said later, it wasn't pain or fear, but recognition. The hum was speaking to her through every note, telling her stories older than time. Stories of Callan harmonica, of Caraphonagon, of Rainbow Elira's ship and Oran Porch, each one a verse in the same eternal song. When she stopped, the silence that followed was holy. The old resonance corps pulsed once, then went still. The city was quiet again, but not dead. The hum lingered, soft of breath. May felt her things and walked out into the dawn, leaving the harmonium behind. It belongs there, she said. The hum got its hope again. In the years that followed, people came to that place, drawn by something they couldn't explain. The city became a sanctuary, not for worship, but for listening. Pilgrims from across the world came to sit among the ruins and hear the faint vibration that never stopped. They built no walls, no altars, just open spaces where the hum could breathe. They that at the quiet forge. From that forge came a new kind of prosperity, not the kind you could hold, but the kind that built itself into the way people lived. Markets stopped using numbers for worth. They used resonance. The fairer trade, the more balanced the hum between both hands. Greed couldn't hide in a world that vibrated with truth. Crooked men found their voices turning flat, while honest ones sang without even knowing. It wasn't law that kept order. It was tone. When someone broke trust, the hum fell silent round him, like the air itself disapproved. And so, for another age, humanity lived in tune, not perfect, but patient. Not loud, but steady. The hum had once been a whisper, then a roar, then a prayer. Now it was simply a way of being, every step, a note, every choice a chord, every life a verse. And somewhere in that rhythm, if you listened real close, you could still hear May harmonium deep beneath the ground. Playing the same slow melody she played that night in the dark, a song that never ended because it never had to. As centuries drifted onward, the quiet forge became less a place and more a memory that the world carried like a tune whistled unconsciously. People would still travel there now and then, to sit in the ruins and let the low hum roll through their bones. But even that pilgrimage became less necessary over time. The hum had moved on again, as it always did, slipping from the stones of the forge into the air, the rivers, the pulse of machines, and the hearts of those who didn't even know they were listening. What began then survival had turned into rhythm, and what was rhythm but the quiet arithmetic of life itself? A balance settled over the ages. A new kind of restlessness began to grow. Peace, for all its beauty, carries its own kind of hunger. A world that hums too perfectly risks forgetting the glory of dissonance. It was in that stillness that a boy named Jalen Core first started hearing something different. He was born in the high mesas of the South Plains, where the air was thin and the nights cold enough to make fire sing in the stove. Jalen was one of those rare children who could hear beyond what most men code silence. He'd sit for hours beside the windmills, listening to the tiny wavers in their pitch, claiming he could tell when rain was coming by how the hum leaned to the left. His mother thought it was imagination. His father thought it was madness. But the hum, It has a way of finding the right ears. And Jalen were tuned to something the world hadn't heard since the days of the Lyra voyage. The counter hum had started small, just faint notes beneath the world's steady tone. They weren't harsh or angry, just off. Like a second melody running below the first, wandering in the shadows of harmony. Jalen couldn't ignore it. He said, it was like hearing someone call your name through a dream. You didn't know where from, but you knew it was meant for you. So he followed it. He built a contraption out of scraps, part wind harp, part transmitter, guesswork. It didn't look like much, but when he strung it between two cliff faces, the wind that passed through it began to play tones no man hadn't recorded. They were sharp, strange, wild. It was as if the world itself was remembering its younger, untamed days.
They counted he was alive. Word spread fast. Some said he'd uncovered the raw voice of creation, the noise before order. Others whispered that he'd awakened something dangerous, a force the hum had buried on purpose. The elders of the Quiet Forge came riding out to see him, robes humming with the resonance of old wisdom. They asked him to silence his machine, claiming the balance was delicate, that the hum could not afford to be disturbed again. But Jalen shook his head. Balance, he said, ain't the same as stillness.
The hum been too quiet for too long, it forgetting the storm that made it sing. And so despite their warnings, he let the machine play. The sound spread like wildfire across the mesas, rolling down into valleys and rivers. For days, the air quivered with two voices, the hum of peace and the hum of chaos, intertwining like dueling dancers. And then something miraculous happened. The sky answered. Clouds there, not in anger, but in rhythm. Lightning didn't strike, it pulsed, each flash in perfect counterpoint to the song below. The world wasn't rejecting the new hum, it was harmonizing with it. The people watched till the horizon itself began to glow faintly, and for the first time in ages they heard what the hum had been misintention. Life heartbeat, the edge that makes beauty real. When the storm finally broke, Jalen's machine was gone, shattered, scattered across the mesa. The boy himself was never found. Some say he was struck by lightning. Others say he became part of the sound itself. But after that day, the world hum changed again. It deepened, richer, more layered. The piece remained, but it was no longer flat. It breathed. The people called it the split harmony. A reminder that even in perfect balance, contrast is the soul of song. Generations later, the hum influence would be seen in everything from architecture to art, to the new systems of exchange that pulsed beneath society's surface. Instead of money, people traded frequency. Each individual had a resonance signature, a pattern that represented how they contributed to the world harmony. Builders, teachers, wanderers, farmers, all humming in their own key. The more authentic one tone, the more value it held. False notes, lies, greed, manipulation couldn't last long, for they caused visible distortions in the field around them. The hum itself became the keeper of truth. But the story of Jalen Core lingered like an unresolved chord. In quiet moments, when wind moved the canyons just right, travelers swore they could still hear his counter-hum, humming beneath the surface of the world like a heartbeat under sleep. Some said it was warning, others said it was evolution. Whatever it was, it kept the hum from going stale. And maybe that was the lesson hidden in all the ages, that perfection ain't the goal. Perfection is a kind of silence. The flaws, the risks, the dissonance that keep the music alive. Wealth, too, is that. If it grows too smooth, too predictable, it loses its purpose. The hum, like fortune, needs friction. It needs someone like Jalen every few lifetimes to shake the dust off its chords, to make the world remember that even serenity must sometimes be sung with a storm. So the people kept building, kept singing, kept arguing, laughing, and loving. Their lives became melodies of patience and persistence, of work and wonder, of rest and risk. The hum carried all of it, the peace and the pain, the rain and the fire, and through it, somewhere beyond the reach of stars, the echo beyond waited, humming back with quiet pride, knowing the song of the world would never truly end. Time passed again, and like all things that lived too long, memory began to thin around the edges. The old words, the hum, the bass, and the quiet forge turned to metaphor. Children learned them in lullabies, not history. They'd sing soft tunes under silver night skies, their voices carrying through mist and wind like embers from an ancient fire. But somewhere in those songs, the truth still stirred. Because the hum was never truly stopped. It went quiet enough to let the world forget how much it depended on it. By the time the next turning came, most of humanity had moved upward. Cities floated now, vast mountain ranges, riding magnetic currents high above what was once called Earth. And they fade this new realm, the Aether Line, a web of platforms connected by bridges of light and air. Down below, the old lands were left to rest. The valleys grew wild again, rivers carved new paths, and the turbines of Oran time stood silent, rusted, but proud bones of a world that once hummed in perfect balance. Up in the Aether Line, though, the song had changed. Progress, as it always does, had grown loud. The hum of the people's lives, once gentle, once steady, had been drowned by the roar of engines, algorithms, and endless data streams that hummed too fast to listen to. The resonance had turned to static. And while no one spoke of it outright, everyone felt it a kind of ache in the chest, a silence beneath all the noise. It was in this age that an old man named Cyrus Vale found himself haunted by dreams. Wasn't anyone special, just an archivist tending to records that no one cared to read anymore. He'd been born into the hum of the upper cities, fed by light and air and the promise of eternal motion. But in his sleep, he kept hearing something older, a tone that didn't fit the new world. Slow, deep, human. Started searching. At first it was curiosity. He figured it might have been a subconscious echo, maybe a glitch in his memory implants. But the dreams persisted. Each night the hum grew clearer. Each night it whispered a name he didn't recognize. Oren, then May, then Jalen. Names that had no record in the archives, no mention in the data systems of the Ether Line. But the sound that carried them was too real to ignore. It wasn't digital. It vibrated in his bones. So against reason, against logic, Cyrus packed his things and left the upper cities for the forgotten world below. Few ever descended. It was said that the air down there was thick with dust and silence, that the soil was haunted by static remnants of the early hum experiments. But Cyrus wasn't afraid. He took a glide skiff down through the clouds, his vessel humming with old mag drives that coughed and rattled against the wind. When he broke through the fog, he saw the old world sprawled out before him, quiet but alive in its own way. The turbines stood like grave markers, the rivers shimmered with algae light, and the air itself carried a faint, familiar vibration. Not machine, not wind, something older. The hum had never left. He landed in what the maps still logged, the basin of song, though the words meant little to him then. All he knew was that his instruments went haywire the moment he touched ground. Every frequency meter, every sensor began to dance without pattern, registering waves no human tech could interpret. Cyrus stepped out, boots sinking into soil soft as breath, and for the first time in his life, he heard the hum without interference. It was low, like a slow heartbeat, pulsing through the air, the ground, his chest. Not loud, not even clear, but alive. He knelt, pressing his ear to the earth, and whispered, "I hear you." He spent months there, listening, building makeshift recorders from scraps, trying to capture the rhythm. He discovered something uncanny. The hum changed when he spoke near it, responded like a conversation carried on through vibration instead of sound. Some nights it grew softer, other nights louder, like tides shifting under a moon. He began humming back, low, tentative, like a child relearning an old lullaby. And over time, the hum answered. It began in the riverbeds. Water that had lain still for centuries started to ripple in time with his notes. Then the turbines, long rusted, began to turn again, slow and stubborn, creaking with ancient song. The wind followed, then the trees, until one dawn, Cyrus stood on the ridge and realized the world itself was singing back. Word of what happened in the basin spread like wildfire across the Aether Line. Pilots flew down to see for themselves, engineers bought quarters, philosophers bought questions. And for the first time in hundreds of years, the upper world went quiet, listening to what they had forgotten. The hum wasn't gone. It had just been waiting for someone to listen again, someone patient enough to stop talking and start hearing. Cyrus never called it discovery. He said it was remembering. We didn't create the hum, he told the first team that landed near him. We would forgot how to join in. Under his guidance, the world began changing once more. The Aether-lined cities lowered themselves gradually back toward the earth, letting roots sink down into soil, letting the two worlds meet again. Machines were tuned not just for efficiency, but for harmony. Their engines sang in soft resonance with rivers and trees. Cities began building orchestras out of sound and light, powered by the frequencies of their own daily lives. Every hammer strike, every footstep, every breath, it all wove into the hum grand melody. Cyrus died old, sitting beside one of the turbines he'd helped awaken, humming softly to himself. The people buried him in the basin beside Orrin Brave, though none of them knew the story well enough to understand the irony. But the hum knew. It rolled across the valley that night, slow and deep, like a sigh from the soul of the world itself. And if you were there to listen, you'd swear the sound that followed was not just wind, but the voice of 1,000 years whispering through time. We never stopped singing, we only forgot the words.